in double figures. Through tomorrow, a decent amount of sunshine perhaps across eastern parts at first, but a bit more cloud feeding in as we go through the day. Elsewhere, a few sunny spells perhaps, but also a few outbreaks of showery rain here and there. But on the whole, a quieter, drier day than today for most. And with that though, temperatures a few degrees lower, not quite as exceptionally mild. As we head towards the weekend, and we are likely to see another weather system bring some heavy rain as we go through Saturday, but that clears through, and so Sunday at the moment looks like the driest day. Bye-bye.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria DiPiero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Farage, Monday to Thursday from 7 p.m.
Lots of people have different ideas, but principally a conservative approach to getting growth is to reduce taxes so that people, ordinary people and businesses can spend more of their own money to invest and grow the economy.
So the theory is that you cut taxes and that then pumps more money into the economy.
Exactly right. And then people, you know, it's not government that are creating wealth. It's individuals, businessmen, companies that create wealth. It's the private sector that creates wealth, that the public sector then taxes and spends.
I get the theory, but one of the criticisms of you, and I think one of the criticisms actually of all political parties, is they appear to be incapable of cutting government spending.
That's the key. I mean, and I think when I look back, is that we should have had a credible plan to reduce the increase in spending. Now, that's often a difficult concept to explain.
But it's in line with inflation, etc.
That's all right. So, so when you're slowing the increase, it means, you know, one year you spend £100, and the next year you spend maybe £101, as opposed to going up to £110. So the actual level isn't going down, but you're slowing the increase. And that's very much what I tried to do. And actually, looking back, the one thing I wish I'd done, was to present a credible spending plan at the same time as the tax cuts that we announced.
You had a go, it didn't work out for whatever reason, and that analysis will go on for some years to come. We have Jeremy Hunt there as Chancellor now, hinting quite strongly now there won't be any tax cuts, but the truth of it is, under 14 years of Conservatives, for a variety of reasons, the tax burden has risen to the highest since the Attlee government way back in
80 years,
1951, whatever it is.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together. For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Good morning, 9:30 on Thursday the 15th of February. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with me, Andrew Pearce and Pip Thompson.
Britain is in recession. Chancellor Jeremy Hunt says low economic growth is not a surprise and the UK must stick to the plan.
And anti-Semitism hit an all-time high last year after the Hamas terror attacks on Israel. It's being described as an explosion of hatred by a Jewish charity.
Preach in here, it also depends on what you say. You might be committing criminal offences as well. If you make members of the public harassment, alarm, distress, it's a criminal offence.
We're speaking to the Christian gospel singer who was threatened with arrest over hate crime complaints in Uxbridge in London. He claims he was just preaching his religion.
And a royal rebrand in the latest update on the Harry and Meghan saga. Apparently they've chosen to use the Sussex title as the surname for their children Archie and Lilibet, rather than their names Mountbatten Windsor. they're going to be accused of cashing in on that. They've already called the daughter Lilibet, Queen's affectionate nickname, and now Sussex.
Very interested to know the mechanics of all that, so we will be delving into it. What do you want to delve into this morning with us here on Britain's Newsroom? Do let us know. gbviews@gbnews.com. Here's your headlines now. It's Tatiana.
Pip, thank you very much and good morning. Top stories from the GB Newsroom. The UK economy has officially entered into recession. Figures from the Office for National Statistics shows that the economy shrank by 0.3% at the end of last year. It follows another period of decline of 0.1% in the previous 3 months. A recession is defined as 2 consecutive 3-month periods where the economy contracts rather than grows. It's the first time the UK has entered recession since the first half of 2020, after the first COVID lockdown. Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, says inflation and high interest rates are behind the output fall.
We always expected growth to be weaker while we prioritised tackling inflation. That means higher interest rates. And that's the right thing to do because you can't have long-term healthy growth with high inflation, but also for families when there's a cost of living crisis, when the cost of their weekly shop is going up, their energy bills are much higher. It's the right thing to do. The underlying picture here is an economy that is more resilient than most people predicted. Inflation is coming down, real wages have been going up now for 6 months. And if we stick to our guns, independent forecasters say that by the early summer we could start to see interest rates falling.
More than 4,000 anti-Semitic incidents were recorded in the UK last year. The figures more than double the previous all-time high in 2021 and marks a rise of 589% compared to 2022. The soaring figures being put down to the sheer volume which took place following the Hamas attacks of October 7th. The Community Security Trust, a charity which provides protection for British Jews against anti-Semitic attacks, said the explosion in hatred is an absolute disgrace. And the number of overseas students applying for university spots in the UK has risen for a second year running. New university admissions data shows over 115,500 students from outside the country applied to start in September. That's up from almost 115,000 last year. It comes despite tougher government rules to help slash migration. However, the number of international applicants remains below the high of just over 116,000 before the COVID pandemic. For the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen, or you can go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now back to Andrew and Pip.
A very good morning to you. Welcome to Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Pip Thompson.
Well, we're officially in a recession after gross domestic product fell 0.3% in the final quarter of last year.
This is the first recession since the pandemic. Well, joining us in the studio is political editor of the Daily Express, Sam Lister, and barrister and columnist Sam Fowles. Welcome to you both this morning. There is some people saying that we need to be a little less dramatic about this, Sam. It is a technical recession, but the overall picture is more of stagnation.
Yeah, the figures were slightly worse than people were predicting, but actually, overall, for the whole of last year, it looks like the economy grew slightly by 0.1%. So if you look at the whole year and take it into account over the whole 12 months, we didn't actually kind of contract. I mean, these are very marginal figures, 0.1% minus 0.3%. It's all kind of dancing on the head of a pin, isn't it? So I think actually stagnation is a better description. And technical recession was a kind of invented term, I think it was in the 70s or 80s. It was just to try and make it easier for people to understand when the economy was really failing. But actually, we're not really in that position. We're just kind of flatlining.
I mean, I'm old enough to remember recession in the 70s and 80s when the real problem then was mass unemployment.
Yeah.
Soaring unemployment, hit 3 million. employment in this country is pretty good, the employment figures.
Yeah, and obviously yesterday we saw the inflation figures. They were slightly better than expected, but again, it was kind of marginal. So I think the problem is really, employment is not the problem it was in the 70s and 80s. It doesn't feel to people like we're actually in a recession, I think. Obviously, cost of living is an issue, but it doesn't feel like it did in the 70s or 80s, where you've got those big queues of people at the job centre, all that kind of thing. And actually, we're probably already out of this recession, that's the truth. So, we've been in and out and nobody's noticed.
What do you think, Sam?
I think I agree that we need to take a much longer term look at this. 0.1 here, 0.3 there. That's not the issue. But we do need to have a conversation about why, for the past 10 years, we've been in and out of these technical recessions. We've been stagnating. When you look at I think the more worrying things are like looking at the level of investment in the economy. And over the past 10 years or so, Britain has become less interesting for investors, less attractive. Productivity for Britain compared to the United States and France and Germany, we're behind all of those. We're not as good an economy as we need to be.
And productivity has been an issue for years and years. What's the problem?
Investment. The thing that's stopping productivity is we haven't invested in capital and we haven't invested in infrastructure. And although we've invested somewhat in skills, we haven't invested enough. So when people are thinking about, are we going to invest in Britain, they're thinking, well, why would we at this point? Because you don't have the stuff that you need to grow an economy. And that is the result of government policy over the past, since 2011, when government policy has been to contract the economy, to not invest in the economy, and just hope that somehow, magically, the private sector steps in, even when you've created an economic context that discourages the private sector from stepping in.
Sam, we are hoping to hear from Jeremy Hunt this morning. He won't be drawn on the details of the spring budget next month, but he does keep talking about this sticking to the plan. He trots this line out frequently.
The government's position is basically, if we are getting there. It's been slow, it's been painful, but we're getting there. And if you switch to Labour, you go back to square one. That's their pitch. I think actually, I know Sam said, I think Sam was slightly unfair there when he said that the government was trying to make the economy contract. I don't think that's fair. I think obviously when the Conservative government came in, there was a global financial crisis which took a long time to get out of. I think you'll find with Rishi Sunak in the Chancellor's autumn statement, they focused on business and they put an awful lot of tax breaks into allowing companies to invest in infrastructure, and the companies basically now get 100% of their investment back. So I think that will make a big difference.
What is with that, Sam? I mean, we had the measures that don't come into April, and yet the national insurance cuts came in January.
Yeah.
Why couldn't we all have come in January to kickstart investment straight away? I just don't understand
It's a very good point. And actually, the NI cut coming in January, that was very much targeted at allowing employers to bring in new employees. It was to create jobs, to boost the economy. And so, perhaps there was an argument for doing everything in January. I think what they're going to aim for in the March budget is to obviously lower personal taxes so people do feel a bit better. But obviously at this tricky time, you've got to kind of really measure how far you want to go.
Yeah.
It's going to be a very fine balancing act for them.
But Sam, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation is saying, yes, it's concerning that we've entered this technical recession, but that's not at the forefront of people's minds here. People up and down the country are looking at how much food they've got in the fridge, how much money is in their pocket at the end of the month.
Absolutely, and that comes down to the fundamentals of the economy. We have a cost of living crisis because ordinary people have been forced to bear the costs of bringing down inflation, have been forced to bear the costs of the various different sort of economic adventures that governments have been on over the past 10 years and haven't worked. We have... And this doesn't have to be an argument about whether Brexit was a good idea or a bad idea, but the type of Brexit that we went through. We have signed trade agreements that are less advantageous than we had before. The type of Brexit that we went through put up more barriers than it did before. So ordinary people that are wanting to do business, small businesses are facing more barriers. All of these make life more difficult for just your sort of small and medium-sized enterprises.
But you talk about lack of government investment. For God's sake, this country's in more debt The debt burden in this facing country, it's trillions. It's eye-watering. The figures are almost monopoly board money. And also, the tax burden is at an all-time high. So where is this money to come from, Sam, to invest?
Well, the mistake that we keep making is thinking that a national economy is like a household economy or a credit card. And it doesn't work like that. We mentioned back in 2011, the government said, we've got lots of debt, so we need to cut everything, and that's going to bring the debt down. We're here in 2024, and the debt's only gone up.
Well, we did have a pandemic.
And we had a lot. Well, but even before the pandemic, the debt problem hadn't been solved, and other countries which didn't make those mistakes, for example, the United States, doesn't have the same problems as us. So, in order to grow an economy, you have to invest in things like infrastructure, which we have just not properly invested in at all, and the only way to pay down the debt is to grow the economy relative to it. But if you don't try and grow the economy first, you never pay down the debt.
This sounds like the mantra from the Labour Party. We're going to grow the economy, which is how we reduce debt and we get investment. But how do you do that?
Well, the mantra from the left is always to spend more money, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the question is never how can we make things more productive, more efficient. It is, let's chuck more money at this, and that obviously puts up taxes. And I think already when we've got such a high tax burden, I don't think that is a solution people are looking for.
No.
Let's move on to another big story of the day about anti-Semitism being at an all-time high, the highest in over, well, at least 40 years, surged by almost 150%, with more than 4,000 anti-Semitic incidents recorded in the UK last year. This is just appalling and rocketed, as you know, since October the 7th.
Yeah, I mean, it's shocking. I mean, this is a record high. This is, since their record began, this is the highest ever number of anti-Semitic incidents. But I don't think it will come as a surprise to many people, because actually we see this now. We see this on our streets. We see people now ending up in court and, you know, for anti-Semitic behaviour. We see the protests that can sometimes, obviously, largely peaceful, but can sometimes veer into anti-Semitism. The taxi driver who brought me here this morning, he raised this as an issue. I didn't prompt him, and he has a Jewish wife. He said she can't even post messages now on social media because she's just abused. He feels very concerned for his family. And this is it's a very real problem for people.
And until, Sam, this war in Gaza ends, it's going to continue, is it not?
It is. Yeah, and that's an absolute tragedy, because it makes me really, really angry, because the first thing that I did, and I'm sure everyone did when they, on October the 7th, was phone their friends, right? You know, and say, how are you? Are you all right? And universally, the answer from my friends was, no, I'm not all right. And that hasn't changed. And the fact that we can't talk about a very serious international relations issue, which is Israel's conduct in Gaza, without making anti-Jewish comments, is just blood-boiling. Because firstly, and most importantly, it's horrendous if you're Jewish. And you know, one of my friends said, look, I'm worried at the moment because there's a car I don't recognise parked outside my kid's school. It turned out to be nothing, but that's the atmosphere they're living in. But at the same time, you have, the International Court of Justice has said Israel's actions are very worrying. We need to be worried about this. We need to be able to critique Israel. But the fact that some people can't distinguish, means you can't have that really important debate as well. So it's terrible for everyone.
But also, if you say anything that is in support of civilians in Gaza, as in what they are going through, the children that have been orphaned, the injuries, you can be accused of being anti-Jewish.
Yeah,
I've had it myself on social media. You cannot say wrong for saying right.
And I've had the same critique. And indeed, certain, I think, Israeli spokespeople describe the International Court of Justice as being anti-Semitic.
We shouldn't forget, though, that Hamas is not seeking a ceasefire, because Hamas is still committed to the eradication of the State of Israel.
Oh, yeah. Hamas could stop this today.
And they've still got lots of hostages.
The spokespeople have said over and over again, we will do this over and over again until
There'll
we
be
achieve
another
our aim.
October the 7th
Exactly.
and another and another and another.
And we have to remember that Hamas planned this.
Yes.
You know, I think I've heard it was 2 years in the planning.
Yeah.
2 years in the planning, knowing what the response would be,
Yeah.
knowing that all the Hamas leaders would flee to friendly neighbouring nations, knowing that everybody else would be in the tunnels.
Yeah.
And the innocent people would be the casualties
and the
of this.
community,
They
and
knew
the charity
that when they
that's-
did this.
The charity that's looked at these figures, the Community Security Trust, says it traces it to the Hamas attack.
Yeah.
That's when anti-Semitic groups are not Israel's response. It started there.
Yeah, yeah.
And incidents in schools and universities alone up by 200%.
Terrible.
And you remember, actually, on that day, the very day, already on social media, people were making those kind of anti-Israel comments, anti-Jewish comments on the day.
It didn't take long.
Before the response.
Exactly.
Thank you both for now. We are next going to be talking about the latest twist in the royal rebrand. Now, this is Harry and Meghan adopting the Sussex title as a surname for their children. What do you think of that?
They're cashing in.
What do you think? We know what Andrew thinks. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you. Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months. That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Britain's Newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
The EU rules are trying to choke even that. And I just think, you know, I would join this protest in a heartbeat. And you are right to point out this stuff about them being right-wing. How dare they slate them as right-wing when these are real people whose livelihoods
And
are
remember, a
being
lot of
trashed.
people who work in the farm industry, Malone, get paid very little money.
They get paid,
Agricultural workers are very badly paid.
They get paid nothing, Pierce. And, you know, the profits... I think on Clarkins Farm, I read somewhere that I saw that when you sell it like a sheep's skin, it's 30 pence or something.
Right.
And you say, what?
Yeah.
And so you wonder how they can manage that. And I think after a year, Clarkson made a handful of pounds.
He made like 90 quid profit or something.
In a whole year working.
But Carol makes a really good point, though, doesn't she, Nikki, about this idea that we go to the supermarkets, we shop there, we eat our food, we don't often give it a thing. And the farmers have become so frustrated by this idea that they are not respected.
Absolutely. I mean, they're running what are effectively small businesses, often family businesses that have been passed down through generations. They also tend to know the land and the animals better than anyone else in those areas. You know, I'm all for green protests, you know, I'm all for climate change activism, but actually... the only way you can do that is gradually. It's exactly what we've seen with Port Talbot. You know, you can't just go in and say, you're not going to do it anymore this way. You've got to do it this way instead.
The Tata Steel thing.
Yes, exactly. You've got to do it this way instead. You know, lots of farmers are on board with protecting the planet, but they can't do it overnight. You've got to give them time. So they're protesting, you know, they're saying no farmers, no food.
When
well,
you
it
say
can't
you
get any more
support some of
obvious.
these environmental protests, you're not one of these closet supporters of Just Stop Oil, are you?
I'm not a closet supporter. I think I've been quite open about Just Stop Oil.
No.
I don't like all their methods, but I do like the
like any of
message.
them.
But I do appreciate the
any of
message.
them.
Yeah, but sometimes you've got to do difficult things.
What they're asking for now, those protesters, are unrealistic. What these protesters are asking for is not unrealistic.
No.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Now, everybody's favourite couple, perhaps not mine.
People do love them.
Yeah, of course they do, and of course they do. Harry and Meghan have made yet another attempt, I think, to cash in on the royal pedigree.
They've adopted the Sussex title as a surname for their children as they apparently attempt to, what they say, unify their family.
Their children are now known as Archie Sussex and Lilibet Sussex rather than their married name, Mountbatten Windsor. This is according to the Times today.
So is this embarrassing for the royal family? What are the mechanics of it? Well, still with us in the studio is political editor of the Daily Express, Sam Lister, and barrister and columnist Sam Fowles. Sam Fowles, do you understand how you can adopt this? I mean, is it as easy as saying, right, I want them to be this?
Well,
that doesn't work like that for the rest of us.
No, it doesn't.
Minions.
It is tradition, if you're an aristocrat, to use your location title as your surname, and I mean Disraeli's wife famously used to write to him just using her surname that she'd got from the title that he gave her. So that's fairly standard, I think amongst the aristocrats. But my question is, why isn't it normal for all of us? Why can't I call myself Sam Fowles, Worcestershire, which is where I'm from?
But why would you?
I mean, Worcestershire's nicer than Fowles.
Yeah. I mean, it's clear, the timing is odd, isn't it? And it's come out just as they're
they say
Canada,
though it's been in. Sorry, Andrew. They were saying that it's been in place since the coronation. This has been done.
Really?
There's always a suspicion, isn't there, with Harry and Meghan?
Yeah.
That everything is done for a reason, and everything is done for maximum publicity
and maximum monetisation.
Money. Yeah, and Andrew knows I've always been slightly sympathetic to Harry, which is never necessarily maybe that popular on this panel, but I do think there is a cynicism here, and I do think it is. It is cocking a snook, as royal correspondents have said, to the royal family and to the traditions.
These are the latest pictures of them on Valentine's Day yesterday in Whistler in Canada. This is it's a year before the Invictus Games, so there's events taking place. Harry had a go at sit-down skiing, I believe.
And the timing of this, so this name change comes out just as they're on their first joint trip for months and months.
On Valentine's Day.
On Valentine's Day.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah.
It's so simple.
There is, I mean, I think, to be fair, all the royals are very acutely aware of PR and how to stage things on certain days to make a maximum impact. They're not alone in this, but I think it is, if you make a big thing about leaving the country to go and live a private life as a private citizen...
And not be royal anymore.
And not be royal. People are right to say, to question, why are you doing this?
Yeah,
It seems...
Because Sussex is royal. It's because it was a title given to them by the Queen at their wedding, Duke of Sussex. So why, if you don't want to be royal anymore, Sam, having slagged off the royal family for the last 3 years, do you then call your children Sussex? Having, by the way, called your daughter Lilibet, with the Queen's favourite nickname, which only a handful of people were able to call her.
Well, I mean, I honestly don't know why they would do this, because I don't know...
Are you cynical? Are you suspicious of their motives?
I am cynical about this whole system, that in the 21st century we have people running around debating which aristocratic title they're gonna call themselves.
That's another debate. That's another
is this a
good
Republican
debate.
streak coming out of you here, Sam?
Thank you both very much.
Let's call myself a Democrat.
We are going to have to leave it there, but
note.
we are back again after this.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, very good morning to you. Alex Burkill here with your latest GB News weather forecast. For many, it's going to be pretty cloudy and rather wet today, but in the southeast, it's actually likely to stay largely dry, and here we should have some brightness at times. A very different story for most other places, though. Often quite cloudy, some persistent rain already to start across many northern and western areas, and that rain is likely to turn heavier across parts of the southwest later on. It is a mild day, though. Temperatures could be even higher than yesterday, with highs of around 16 or 17 Celsius, so exceptionally high for the time of year. As we go through the evening, we're going to see more heavy rain affecting southern areas, and that swathe of wet weather pushes its way a little bit further eastwards, affecting parts of the southeast overnight. Otherwise, we will see some clear breaks developing, but also a scattering of showery outbreaks of rain, particularly towards the north. Sticking with some milder air across the UK, so I'm not expecting temperatures to drop a huge amount, some places staying in double figures. Through tomorrow, a decent amount of sunshine perhaps across eastern parts at first, but a bit more cloud feeding in as we go through the day. Elsewhere, a few sunny spells perhaps, but also a few outbreaks of showery rain here and there. But on the whole, a quieter, drier day than today for most. And with that, though, temperatures a a few degrees lower, not quite as exceptionally mild. As we head towards the weekend, and we are likely to see another weather system bring some heavy rain as we go through Saturday, but that clears through, and so Sunday at the moment looks like the driest day. Bye-bye.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Still to come, the London Merseydick car has been blasted for unveiling the new overground rail lines as the Lioness, Mildmay, Windrush, Weaver, Suffragette and Liberty lines. £6.3 million refit. Just make the trains work on time, Mr Mayor. That's what we want.
Priorities, priorities!
This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Camilla Tominey Show, Sunday mornings from 9:30.
We had Grant Shapps on last week. He was talking about how defence spending is now creeping up to 2.25% of GDP. Ben Wallace's predecessor suggested it should be 3%. We hear that we've got the smallest army, I think, since the Napoleonic Wars. Numbers are down. There's a question as to whether we can staff frigates in the Red Sea. Why haven't we sent aircraft carriers? What's your impression of the situation?
Well, I don't think it matters how much you spend, it's how effectively you spend it. And we spend it very ineffectively. We have lots of scandals about defence spending. And I think partly because of the monopoly position of some of our defence suppliers, we don't get good value and we don't get reliability. This latest story in the Telegraph is that HMS Diamond, which is our ship, which is out there defending the Red Sea, doesn't have the capability of firing a missile from the ship to the land, so it can't participate in the attacks on the Houthis. So in order that we can participate in the attacks, we're flying RAF aircraft from Cyprus, which is a very long way away. When I was Defence Secretary, I ordered cruise missiles for our nuclear-powered, but not nuclear-armed submarines. And I think we have 6 or possibly 7 of those. But last autumn, it was reported that 5 of those were out of commission, were not available. We have about 21 aggressive surface ships. So we've got 2 aircraft carriers, then we've got frigates, and we've got destroyers. But at any one time, you can count on about half of those not being available because they're under refit or whatever. So we have a minimal surface fleet now. And for whatever reason, it doesn't seem that we're able to deploy a submarine to the area that can fire cruise missiles. Our 2 aircraft carriers, built at enormous expense, are sitting in Portsmouth.
Which seems to most people ludicrous,
well,
at least with what's going on.
It doesn't seem ludicrous to me.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning, it is 10 a.m. on Thursday, February the 15th. You are with Britain's Newsroom. Great to have you with us. I'm Pip Thompson and this is Andrew Pearce.
Britain falls into recession. Chancellor Jeremy Hunt says low economic growth is not a surprise and Britain's got to stick to the plan. We're going to hear from him shortly.
You preach in here, it also depends on what you say. You might be committing criminal offences as well. If you make members of the public harassment, alarm, distress, it's a criminal offence.
We're speaking to the Christian gospel singer who was apparently threatened with arrest over hate crime complaints in Uxbridge in West London. He claims he was just preaching his religion.
Honestly. Anti-Semitism is at an all-time high last year after the Hamas terrorist attacks on Israel. It's been described by one Jewish charity as an explosion of hatred.
Putin backs Biden. The Russian President Vladimir Putin has said he would like to see Joe Biden win the next US presidential election.
And gang crime crackdown. A GB News exclusive report reveals those barbershops, you've seen a lot of them in your high streets, I'm sure, are being exploited by criminals to launder money and employ illegal immigrants.
There's broader organised crime behind this. These sorts of premises do not pop up overnight without money behind them.
I'm looking forward to that report on the barbershops because there are loads of them near where I live. And I keep
wherever
thinking,
you live.
how do you sustain all these? Because they always appear to be empty.
No, it's really, really interesting piece to come, so do stay with us for that. We're getting plenty of views from you about Harry and Meghan giving their children the surname Sussex. What do you think about it? gbviews@gbnews.com, and anything else that occurs to you, do get in touch. Let's get your headlines. Here's Tatiana.
Pip, thank you and good morning. These are your top stories from the GB Newsroom. The UK economy has officially entered recession. Figures from the Office for National Statistics shows that the economy shrank by 0.3% at the end of last year. It follows another period of decline of 0.1% in the previous 3 months. A recession is defined as 2 consecutive 3-month periods where the economy contracts rather than grows. It's the first time the UK has entered recession since the first half of 2020, after the first COVID lockdown. Chancellor Jeremy Hunt says despite the drop in GDP, the economy is turning a corner.
We always expected growth to be weaker while we prioritise tackling inflation. That means higher interest rates. And that's the right thing to do because you can't have long-term healthy growth with high inflation, but also for families when there's a cost of living crisis, when the cost of their weekly shop is going up, their energy bills are much higher. It's the right thing to do. The underlying picture here is an economy that is more resilient than most people predicted. Inflation is coming down, real wages have been going up now for 6 months. And if we stick to our guns, independent forecasters say that by the early summer we could start to see interest rates falling.
Meanwhile, more than 3 million households in England were classed as being in fuel poverty last year as families continue struggling to heat their homes. The data from the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero shows that 13% were in fuel poverty, largely unchanged from the year before. The figures also revealed that well over a third of English households were forced to spend more than 10% of their income after housing costs on their energy bills. More than 4,000 anti-Semitic incidents were recorded in the UK last year. That's an all-time high. The figures more than double the previous all-time high in 2021 and marks a rise of 589% compared to 2022. The soaring figure is being put down to the sheer volume which took place following the Hamas attacks of October 7th. The Community Security Trust, a charity which provides protection for British Jews against anti-Semitic attacks, said the explosion in hatred is an absolute disgrace. Among its findings, the charity found a worrying proportion of children perpetrating anti-Semitism. Meanwhile, activists are staging a blockade at a defence company's shipyard in Glasgow in solidarity with Palestinians and are calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. More than 100 demonstrators have been blocking entrances to the BAE Systems site in Govan from early hours of this morning. They're taking the action in response to a call from Palestinian trade unionists for workers around the world to disrupt the flow of arms to Israel. A search is underway for 2 children who went missing from a house in the early hours of this morning in Scotland. 12-year-old Hallie Chan and 14-year-old Sonny Hogg were last seen in a property in the Gorebridge area of Midlothian. Police said they're extremely concerned for their welfare. They're urging anyone with information about their whereabouts to contact officers. The number of overseas students applying for university spots in the UK has risen for a second year running. New data shows around 115,500 students from outside of the country applied to start in September. That's up from almost 115,000 last year. However, the number of international applicants remains below the high of just over 116,000 before the COVID pandemic. The data comes after Universities UK announced it would review overseas students' admissions processes following allegations of bad practice by agents recruiting them. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex are on a 3-day visit to Canada. Prince Harry and Meghan have been visiting the winter training camp of the Invictus Games 1 year prior to the event. The pair spent time with athletes and tournament staff in Vancouver, Whistler Village and at Olympic Station. The Invictus Winter Games will take place in Vancouver next February. And the US has launched its first lunar lander to the moon.
3, 2, 1, ignition, and liftoff.
A SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket was used to launch the spacecraft, nicknamed Odysseus, with the hope that it will touch down near the South Pole of the moon next week. If all goes well, it would be the first time a private firm has successfully landed a spacecraft on the moon. For all the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen, or you can go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Welcome back.
Britain's Newsroom. We're just looking at all the emails we're getting in this morning. Thank you so very much. Let's read out some of them, what you've been saying at home. A lot of you getting in touch about this technical recession that we are in, and also Harry and Meghan changing the surnames of their children. What have we got, Andrew?
Let's start with Harry and Meghan. Caroline says the only reason they've changed the name to Sussex is because they're worried they could lose the title. So if given to the children, it's less likely, in other words, using their children again. James says they're perfectly entitled to. Titles can't be removed unless by Act of Parliament or if the holder is convicted of treason. Coats of arms alike.
Margaret, good morning. You say, why don't Harry and Meghan change their name to Markles? Some of you have also said that. I think that you've said if Meghan's such a feminist, why don't they
yeah, indeed.
do that?
And Anne says they should have the Sussex titles removed as they don't live in Britain anymore, and I'm sure the people of Sussex aren't happy they've got the Sussex name. Meghan won't set foot in England, so they may be entitled to Sussex name, so why want it? They're just hurting the royals all the time, and the King doesn't need this right now.
We've also got Jim, though, who does say to us to get off the backs of two people who want to live their own lives, and we've decided that they're an easy target for our biased opinions.
Well, I've got biased opinions, of course I have.
Well, and Jim is perfectly entitled to his.
Yeah, exactly.
He says he's getting in touch from tolerant Newcastle.
Very good. We like people being tolerant
Jim.
in Newcastle. I expect there's some intolerant people there too. And on the recession, Andy says, I may be wrong, but I would class furlough and fuel payments made by this government as investment in Britain. This is a reference to Sam Fowle saying that there wasn't enough investment. How many firms would have gone under without it? And Paul says the UK exports more to the EU now than in 2016, which is true. Investment is up. What's he on about?
Sally, good morning. The man on your panel, that's Sam Fowles, comparing UK to America. How much furloughing did the Americans do for their general public? Then we've got Paul saying, hang on, the US keeps increasing the debt ceiling, so how can your guest refer to the US implying they don't have a debt problem? And Del from Motherwell, hello. You say the recession is caused because we have no industry, manufacturing or trade. And if there's nothing made, you cannot sell products.
Well, yeah, so that's the technical question. And we are...
So we are going to bring you very shortly an interview with the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt. But where we're going to next is Liam Halligan, because he is our business and economics editor. He is right across this news this morning that we are in a technical recession. Good morning, Liam. Explain to us what a technical recession is and how much does it actually matter to us when so many people are just worried about how much pocket money they've got in their pocket at the end of the month?
This is a big day in terms of economic news, Pip, because this is the first time the UK has gone into a recession outside of lockdown
you were saying
since 2009, since that global financial crisis. And what a recession means, it means that GDP, gross domestic product, that's the whole size of the economy, all the transactions in an economy in 1 year. it means that GDP has contracted for 2 successive quarters, got smaller for 2 successive quarters. A quarter is a 3-month period. And what we had this morning from the Office for National Statistics at 7 a.m, I was in the studio, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, reporting on it. We had the Office for National Statistics confirm that between October and December last year, GDP was 0.3% smaller than the same period in 2022, and that's following a 0.1% shrinkage of GDP in the previous 3-month period, July, August and September. So that is the technical definition of a recession. Labour will make a huge hay out of this. They'll say the Conservatives have lost their grip on the economy and so on. How does it affect ordinary people? Well, when there is a recession, when you have people like me on the telly saying things like I've just said, that we're in a recession, business leaders, they invest less, they're less likely to take on staff, they're less likely to be, if you like, entrepreneurial, because they're worried that the recession will kind of cast a cloud over the whole economy and over business sentiment and consumer sentiment and so on. There is some good news here, though, I must say, Pip and Andrew. These GDP numbers, they are by definition backward-looking. They describe what has been. The UK was in recession in the last half of last year, Q3 and Q4, but it was a very short recession because no one is saying that in the current quarter, January, February and March, the economy is contracting. It doesn't feel that way at all. So this is a short recession, 2 successive quarters, and it's quite a shallow recession because 0.1% contraction in Q3, 0.3% contraction in Q4. These are very, very small amounts of economic shrinkage, which could easily be revised away when the numbers are revised in 3 and 6 months' time, as basically the Treasury and the Office for National Statistics find evidence of more commercial activity when people do tax returns and all the rest of it. And actually, so far this year, January and into February, what we call the PMI numbers, the Purchasing Manager Index numbers, surveys of business leaders' opinions about how they feel the economy is actually going. These PMI numbers are actually showing business sentiment and consumer sentiment is looking up. And a big reason for that is because it now looks pretty sure that the Bank of England will soon start cutting interest rates from 5.25%, where they've been since August. They had 14 successive interest rate rises to squeeze out inflation. It does seem now that pretty soon, fingers and toes crossed, if you've got a loan or a mortgage, the Bank of England will start to lower those interest rates. But look, I put all this to Chancellor Jeremy Hunt earlier this morning when I talked to him soon after those GDP figures were released, and here's my interview. Chancellor, thanks a lot for talking to us today, the day it became clear that Britain went into its first non-COVID recession in 15 years. Is your strategy working?
Well, we have always expected that we would have weaker growth while we were tackling inflation at over 11%. It's not possible for an economy to grow healthily or sustainably when you have that inflation, and the only way you can really tackle that is with higher interest rates. And that was the right thing to do because families up and down the country really suffer with high inflation. It pushes up the cost of living, the cost of filling up a tank of petrol, energy bills go up, and so we were right to do that. And, you know, of course, this data is very challenging, but the underlying picture is that that battle against inflation is succeeding faster than many people thought. People thought that we weren't going to get back down to 2% for another year. It now looks like we'll do that in the next few months. And when that happens, if we stick to our guns, stick to this difficult but correct course, what we will see is that the Bank of England is then able to reduce interest rates, reduce the pressure on the economy, and we could start growing more healthily.
Your press release responding to this recession news very much focused on the Bank of England. The Bank of England, it's almost unanimously agreed now, was very late to recognise inflationary dangers. Are they now late in terms of recognising the impact of their high interest rates on the economy? Isn't it time the Bank of England cut rates, and soon?
Well, I think our system depends on, and rightly depends on, the Bank of England operating independently from politicians. So I don't comment on their decisions because I don't think you or GB News listeners would want a system where there could be any kind of political involvement in those interest rate decisions. What I will say is that the increases in interest rates that we've had have succeeded in bringing down inflation from 11% to 4%. And we are now seeing, if you look at the debate inside the Monetary Policy Committee, increasing numbers there, thinking that the time may come sooner to bring down interest rates. We must leave them to make that decision. But for people at home saying, how long is this going to go on for, what the independent forecasters in the market say is that within a matter of months, we could see interest rates starting to fall. And I think that will give some encouragement.
Now, many GB News viewers and listeners are self-employed, run small businesses, and all businesses, as you know well, pay corporation tax. When you stood to be Tory leader, you wanted a 15% rate of corporation tax. I remember you telling me you wanted a 12.5% rate of corporation tax, asking me about how they did it in Ireland, a country I know well, and yet you've put corporation tax up to 25%. Wasn't that a mistake?
Well, we had a situation in which we had to balance the books, otherwise the markets wouldn't have confidence in the UK economy, our debt interest would have soared up and we'd have had even higher taxes. But I do agree with you 100%. I have not changed my position that our future as a country is to have the most competitive business taxes in the world. And that's why in the autumn statement we cut corporation tax. We didn't cut the headline rate, but we did it through this thing called capital allowances.
Small businesses can't take advantage of free expensing. They haven't got the balance sheet to raise the finance to take account of.
Well, let me tell you what I did for people who are self-employed. I abolished an entire class of national insurance. I reduced national insurance for people who are self-employed by 1%. That's an average reduction of £350 a year for someone who's self-employed. So they are the lifeblood of the economy. We're doing everything we can. Small businesses that own pubs or high street shops, they saw their business rates reduced by 75% for another year. So we're doing everything we can to support businesses. And yes, we do want to bring down taxes because we want to encourage investment in the economy.
The headline rate of national insurance did come down, but you know, and the OBR confirmed that actually the tax burden went up because of stealth taxes, because of fiscal drag, people being dragged into higher tax brackets, middle-ranking teachers and public sector officials now paying the higher rate of income tax. That's not very conservative. A 70-year high in the tax burden isn't very conservative, is it?
Well, I think it was right to support businesses up and down the country during the pandemic with the furlough scheme and other support, and it was right to support families in the cost of living crisis where we paid on average about half people's energy bills. Those cost hundreds of billions of pounds. And because we took those difficult decisions, we have seen unemployment remain at historically low levels. But it does have to be paid for. And I've never hidden from the fact that I had to increase taxes in my first autumn statement as Chancellor. But nor have I ever said anything other than I think that the most successful economies in the long run have lighter taxes, and as soon as the chance arose, I would start to bring down the tax burden, and that's what I started to do in the autumn statement last year.
And final question, if I may, the 6th of March is your budget statement. Do you feel under pressure? It's pretty much make or break for the Prime Minister's leadership, isn't it? For your party's ability to properly contest the next election.
Well, what the Prime Minister and I both think is that the most important thing for families up and down the country is that they can see that there is a party that has a plan, that's sticking to that plan, and by the way, that is a very big contrast to the Labour Party that doesn't have an economic plan. They just junked the key central plank of their economic policy, and independent forecasters say if we stick to that plan, we'll get inflation right down, interest rates could start to fall in a matter of months, and that is the thing that matters most to families when they're making a choice for the future of this country. They want to know that they have people who will do the right thing, even if it's not always the easy thing.
Chancellor, thanks a lot for talking to us on
Thank
GB
you.
News.
That's the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, talking to our business and economics editor, Liam Halligan, a little earlier. Let us know what you think of that interview. Some good news, though.
He is the walking, talking definition of steady as you go.
But maybe that is what you need, Andrew.
And he's a bit dull and boring, but again, perhaps that's what you want with somebody with his hand on the financial tiller.
But something positive was him saying that interest rates could be cut sooner than expected, within a matter of months.
But it's not up to him. It's up to the Bank of England
yeah, and they're
Committee.
hinting that could be the case.
Yeah, well, let's hope so, because they're too high, aren't they?
They are. They are.
And particularly if you're struggling with a mortgage. So, still to come, stay with us, as President Putin has told us, specifically, who he'd prefer to be president in the White House.
Yeah, we were on the phone to him earlier.
Yeah, exactly. What was that bloke from America who did the interview? We get a much better interview with Putin. But anyway, the answer from Putin may surprise you. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
Elon Musk has announced that the first patients to receive a groundbreaking brain implant from Neuralink is recovering well.
This is all a bit odd. The product, called telepathy, uses a robot to surgically place a computer chip in a region of the brain that controls movement.
Yes, Elon Musk says that the first goal is to enable people to control a phone or a computer just by thinking. He says that initial tests show promising signs of brain activity, meaning that patients with paralysis could one day overcome their conditions.
Not sure about this one. Joining us to discuss this breakthrough is applied futurist Tom Cheesewright. Tom, this sounds, well, slightly terrifying.
I certainly think a lot of people will be thinking this is something out of a sci-fi horror rather than reality. But this is a technology that's been a long time coming. We've been developing direct brain-computer interfaces for a long time, mostly for the sort of therapeutic reasons that are the initial goal, at least, of Elon Musk's Neuralink, to allow people who are perhaps quadriplegic to have direct control via their brains of initially a smartphone and maybe ultimately artificial limbs or a wheelchair.
It does seem fascinating how quickly this technology is moving on. I saw demonstrations perhaps a year or two ago of people playing a very simple Pong game just by thinking, moving sort of one line on a screen up and down. This seems like potentially there has been a breakthrough that means far more complex things can be controlled just by thinking.
Well, there's lots of different aspects to this technology. The initial attempts to interface with the brain used actually quite thick prongs almost that went into the brain, and they were quite solid, and so if the brain moved, they could potentially cause damage.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria DiPiero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Just a hope. It's that was Cara Malone's distracting me, as she always does. 10:24. You with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Pip Thompson and Cara Malone, of course, who's been whittering away in my ear, and lovely Nikki Hodgins here too. Good to see you both.
What were you two whittering on about?
Well, because he's left his phone at home, hasn't he? So he's been telling me
It's a catastrophe.
how he's trying to get it.
Catastrophe. If you don't have your phone,
It's
ridiculous,
terrible.
isn't it?
It's terrible.
How did we manage before the tyranny of
I know.
phones?
We feel like we don't have a part of our brain with us or something.
Our lives are attached to our phone. Our lives are lived through our phone.
I'm always thinking, do I go home first? Do I go and get it later?
Yeah, but you can't actually use all the facilities that your phone has. All you can actually do is make a phone call.
Yeah.
Because your texts are illegible.
I had...
it's like they're written in a different language.
I'd got myself a new rail card, and it was saved
Pension has
somewhere
one.
in my phone.
Pension has one.
For over 60s. I had to get someone to help me find it because it was lost in the phone somewhere.
Oh, my goodness.
Actually, there's a really good story in the paper about emojis. Older people can't use emojis.
Yeah.
Well, I don't use
I bet you've never sent one in your life.
I've never sent an emoji.
No, because you don't know how to, do
No.
you? Hey, right.
Or what some older people do is they just get so excited about using emojis. You get 3, 4, 5, 6 lines of them.
He gets excited about sending texts because they don't make any sense at all, because he's got big old fingers and they just make
And I
mistakes.
haven't got my glasses on.
So what's the story then, Carol? People are getting... older people are getting emojis all wrong.
They don't know. They don't send them because they're a little bit worried about them, so they don't send them. And I mean, I send emojis. I send quite a lot of them, but I've only just learned to do that thing, Pip, and you'll know what it is, where you can send it and it's all like balloons and they're all floating.
Oh, a GIF.
Is that what it's called? Is that what it thinks?
GIF.
Just learned how to do that.
Yeah,
right.
yeah. It's interesting because I love using emojis in different ways, so I've given different meanings to all of them, and my friends can interpret them. If I send them to a stranger, they're like, what is going on? Because there's a really underused one. Like, for example, there's a wild boar, and it looks like a pig with a monocle, and it's just so funny. And it's really good to send if you're, like, quizzical about something. So, like, that's what I love to do.
So what you send it if you're asking a question and you don't...
Yeah, or I send it if I'm like, I need to examine this further, because it looks like pig through a monocle. Seriously.
Right.
See, it's like you're talking, you know.
Baffling.
How do you use emojis, Andrew, when you have a phone?
He's never sent one.
I've never sent an emoji in my life.
See, do you put kisses on messages?
Older.
Do you put kisses on messages?
Yeah.
Ah, that's nice. I do
A
too.
small X.
Yes.
Small X.
Yes.
That's it.
One.
AX.
You just do one, which I always
yeah.
think is a little bit stingy, but anyway.
I think it's not just older people, though. Younger people, there's all this talk about emojis, and you shouldn't use... At one time, it was you shouldn't use a laughing emoji, apparently. That
Why?
Wasn't very with it. The diagonal laughing face gives you away. Obviously, I'm a millennial. I use it all the time for everything.
What gives you away?
Well, it gives your age away. Because younger people use different...
too
It's like
hard.
every age group uses emojis differently.
Right.
And so you can tell someone's age by what emojis they use.
Oh, Pierce, where
I just rock them. You've got to... I'm 40, I don't care. It's fine.
Well, that must make me a 90.
Well, I mean,
Right.
I use lots of partly ones. I like the crackers and the, you know...
Do you think Harry and Meghan use emojis?
Well,
What do you think about
do we want to talk about that?
We
Yeah.
do. We
yes.
do.
Well, let's talk about that. Yeah, I think it's shocking that they're, you know, this is a couple who, you know.
Are you really shocked by their behaviour? Can anything about their
No, I'm
behaviour
not
shock
shocked.
you?
No,
Really?
I'm not shocked. You know, they're talking about unifying the family, and I was trying to work out what that meant, and I thought, oh, I know what it means. It means they're calling them all Sussex, so they can monetise the kids when they get to a certain age.
Well,
so
they've
the
done that
kids
with
can be
Lilibet's
given.
name.
Well, exactly. Well, we know they didn't tell the whole truth about that either. But you know, this was a promise that they made to the Queen that they would not use their titles and they would not weaponise or monetise.
But they're not
their
using
titles.
the word royal. But
Sussex is... But it's a brand.
It's open to interpretation.
Sussex is royal and Sussex is a brand, and everybody knows what that means by inference. You don't need the word royal in front of it for people to understand. And I think, you know, generally I'm quite positive about Harry and Meghan, but this is just so stupid. Well, ish. I've got some sympathy for them, but not for Meghan, for Harry, definitely.
But why do you think this is stupid?
Because why don't you just give them their actual birth name, which is Mountbatten Windsor, presumably, or give them Meghan's surname, or Wales.
Just that.
There's lots of
She's
actual.
meant to be a feminist. Why not be Markle?
That's what. Well, in my family, I'm Hodgson Ahmed by my actual, day work, not in my job, because both me and my husband and my daughter all have the same name. He took my Hodgson Ahmed as well. We all have the same because we wanted unity. But that's unity to me.
Mountbatten Windsor is a bit of a mouthful, Carol.
But it's very... But it is. To be honest, I've got to tell you, that sounds to me more royal than Sussex because it's a very grand name. And but you know, this is a couple who I think their star is fading on the other side of the ocean.
You think it is?
I think. Yeah. Okay. So their star is fading, and they need to just give it a bit of a jig up again. And that's I know I'm a cynic, but I think that's one of the major reasons he made a 26-hour visit to Britain last week to fly to his father's bedside, and he wasn't at his bedside. He was with him for half an hour, and then flew back.
Oh, you are a cynic.
Because I completely think that they have to remind people in America who they are, where they came from, that they're royal, and this will do exactly that. I've not seen any reports of how he's used that yet, but I'm sure he will have if he hasn't been on news bulletins.
What about these pictures that have come out of Whistler in Canada overnight? They've done an appearance to promote the Invictus Games. Pictures on Valentine's Day.
Yes.
Now, you say no one's interested in them, but
no, I didn't say that. No, I didn't say that.
Well, they're not very popular.
No, what I said was people are very interested, but they've sussed them out now, so they mock them now.
But they're being followed we understand, by a film crew in Canada.
Yeah,
Of course they are.
Of course they are.
It'll be
another series coming out.
It's totally self-serving. You know, I found any pictures of them kind of posed sickening, actually. You know, I think it was really fake what they did yesterday. Also, you're going to promote the Invictus Games when you're on a very expensive skiing holiday. Again, that's totally tone deaf to me. That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, yeah. And the Invictus Games are not for another year either.
Of course. But it was Valentine's Day. In the news, they appeared holding hands and her looking stunning. It's, you know, we work in the media. We know what those pictures are worth, and we know that papers are going to use them because...
And it was all trailed in advance.
Absolutely. Again.
Spontaneous. And as we were told that Harry was going to come to London from America to see his father, he could have just gone to Sandringham.
Quietly. And spent a week,
spent a whole week there, nobody would have known.
Yes.
And it would have probably come out afterwards. That would have been, if he really wanted to spend some
That would have been genuine. Yeah.
But no, he has to press release the fact he's arriving.
But why didn't he stay for more than 26 hours? If your dad's ill...
Because he had to be at that big event with some rugby players or footballers.
Oh, a big deal, exactly.
Yeah.
So,
yes.
But this is someone else, actually, who's called Carol, funnily enough, says it's his prerogative. And isn't it simpler than saying Mountbatten? Windsor is a mouthful for the kids to say and less recognisable later on. If they wanted to be that royal, they would keep the Mountbatten name, surely.
It's not
a good move.
It's not his prerogative, Carol. It's not his prerogative because he made a promise to the Queen that he would not weaponise or monetise the Sussex name. And so it's not his prerogative. He said he wouldn't do it. That was part of the deal of them keeping them.
And that title was the gift from her on his marriage.
Completely. So nothing is sacred to these two.
After he named his daughter, they named the daughter, you know, the Queen's precious nickname and didn't get permission, which is so vile. It's a horrible thing to do.
They said they did.
Yes. And it was just rubbish.
Recollections may vary, she once said.
Yeah, and you know, how kind was she to say that? I mean, you know, that was just that was the nice way of putting it.
We need to move on.
Okay.
We will come back to you. Still to come, with crime appearing to be increasingly out of control. What are the police doing about it?
Threatening to arrest Christians preaching in the street. Don't go anywhere. Speaking from TV for the first time, we'll be joined by the man who says he was threatened by the police. But first, the headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Andrew, thank you, and good morning. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. The UK economy has officially entered recession. Figures from the ONS shows that the economy shrank by 0.3% at the end of last year. It follows another period of decline of 0.1% in the previous 3 months. A recession is defined as 2 consecutive 3-month periods where the economy contracts rather than grows. It's the first time the UK has entered recession since the first half of 2020, after the first COVID lockdown. Chancellor Jeremy Hunt says despite the drop in GDP, the economy is turning a corner. More than 4,000 anti-Semitic incidents have been recorded in the UK by a Jewish charity last year. The figure's more than double the previous all-time high in 2021 and marks a rise of 589% compared to 2022. The soaring figure is being put down to the sheer volume which took place following the Hamas attacks of October 7th. The number of overseas students applying for university spots in the UK has risen for a second year running. New data shows over 115,500 students from outside the country applied to start in September. That's up from almost 115,000 last year. The number is lower than before the COVID pandemic, though. The data comes after Universities UK announced it would review overseas students' admissions processes following allegations of bad practice by agents recruiting them. And the Duke and Duchess of Sussex are on a 3-day visit to Canada. Prince Harry and Meghan have been visiting the winter training camp of the Invictus Games 1 year prior to the event. The pair spent time with athletes and tournament staff in Vancouver, Whistler Village and at Olympic Station. The Invictus Winter Games take place next February. For the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
For stunning gold and silver coins you'll always value, Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2557 and 1.1696 euros. The price of gold is £1,589.94 per ounce, And the FTSE 100's at 7,575 points.
Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Still to come here on Britain's Newsroom, we're going to be talking about the record high levels of anti-Semitism in Britain. It really has exploded. First, in a new GB News series, Innovation Britain, we are looking at the success of British manufacturing around the country.
Over the years, the engineering and manufacturing environments have often been perceived to have been dirty and polluted, but so much has changed in recent years. James, why is that?
I think there was generally an acceptance that that was the atmosphere that people were having to work in. There was nothing they could do about it. People would come into work and just say, well, that's my lot in life. However, if you think about it, this is not really acceptable, and certainly in today's environment, take an office, you wouldn't be expecting to work in an office full of smoke, mist and dust. People would be walking out, and people are thinking, well, hold on, well, I shouldn't have to do the same in a manufacturing environment. And people want a cleaner place to work.
And how are you managing to do this?
Well, Filter Mist manufacture a range of products that extract oil mist, dust and fume at source from industrial settings around the world, and we make them right here in the Midlands.
And you've had your record year.
Yes, we have. We've continued to grow our exports to over 60 countries worldwide, but one of our biggest growth areas has actually been the UK. One of the reasons for that is that we sell a lot to the machine tool sector, who are fitting our equipment to their machines and selling a complete turnkey package which includes clean air to their customers. Meanwhile, the UK government's health and safety executive have focused more on clean air in the workshop. But most of all, people are just wanting, and why wouldn't you want to work in a cleaner environment?
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Lee Anderson's Real World. Fridays from 7 p.m.
Dr. Jane Jones, who's the clinical lead for Care After Combat.
Yep.
Jane, thanks for coming. And just tell me a little bit about your organisation. What do you do?
OK, well, thank you for having me here so we can talk about Care After Combat. So we are an organisation, a charity, who work into the prison system, working with military veterans who've somehow got involved with the justice system and...
So there's quite a high population of ex-servicemen and women in our prisons. Why is that, do you think?
So 2014, the government did a review of who was resident in UK prisons, and what they found were that military veterans are the highest occupational group, and this obviously raises some concerns. Yeah. So the government wanted to do something about that, and so they supported Care After Combat initially just as a scoping exercise, really, to see if there was any way we could help these men and women actually, understand the problems that led to offending behaviour and go on to lead successful lives.
So what sort of offending behaviour are we talking typically for people that's in prison that's actually served in our armed forces?
Primarily, it's violence.
Yeah.
So that is the highest offence that we work with.
Okay.
But of course, the military, as with everybody else, it's the full range of offending behaviour.
OK, so we're in a pub, Jane, Dr. Jane, and I guess for some people, the odd tip of alcohol is good, a bit of fun of a weekend, relax, let your hair down. But for some people, alcohol is not always their best friend, and I guess that plays a part in some of your veterans that end up inside.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, speaking from my own experience, a good 2/3 of the people I work with have some kind of mental health problem or mental health difficulty, struggling to either adapt into civilian life or with some of the traumas they've experienced during service. People might self-medicate with alcohol to manage some of those thoughts and feelings.
Yeah. Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Carson, this Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about.
The Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What's the time? It's 10:40 with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Pip Thompson.
Now, the Metropolitan Police has been filmed threatening to arrest yet another Christian preacher over so-called hate crime complaints.
Let's take a look now. This unfolded in West London last weekend.
If you preach in here, it also depends on what you say. You might be committing criminal offences as well. If you make members of the public harassment, alarm, distress, it's a criminal offence.
I'm aware of that. Yeah, so that's what we're not really doing that. What we're doing is about preaching our religion.
Okay, could you just tell me what you were saying?
So we're saying Jesus is the only way. Record this. We're saying, he asked me what I've been preaching. So we've been preaching about the gospel of Jesus Christ. The Bible says in the book of John, chapter 3, verse 16, that for God so loved the world that he gave his one and only begotten Son, that whosoever, that is any person, doesn't matter if they're black, white, homosexual, drunken, liar, thief, prostitute, whoever believes in him shall not perish but have everlasting life. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but he sent his Son into the world that all can be saved. And that is the message of the gospel. That's what we've been preaching.
Now, by Pastor Dwayne Lopez, who was involved. How many police officers were there?
There was about 5 different police officers
Unbelievable.
there. Exactly.
You're going about, you're a preacher, you've got an established church in Uxbridge, in West London, you're preaching from the gospel. 5 police officers?
5 police officers to intimidate me and try and stop me.
And I'll get my words out in a second. Had they been called by somebody? Were they walking past?
So allegedly they said that a member of the public called them saying that I've been saying some homophobic behaviour, which is absolutely not the case. And then when I questioned the police officer about this, he was saying that he's not met the victim, but he's heard that they said this, so he wanted to demand my details and demand information from me. When I began to question him politely, he began to get more aggressive and threatened to arrest me.
And you were actually threatened with arrest and threatened that they could keep you in a police cell overnight?
Threatened with arrest and threatened to keep me in a police cell overnight, yes, correct.
How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I just feel that we as Christians are given a mandate from our Lord and Saviour Jesus Christ to go out into the world and to preach the gospel. This is a Christian country, we're well within our rights. You know, when the king got ordained, what happened is that they used the Bible, and this is the same Bible that I'm using to present a message of love, the gospel, to every person. And therefore, I feel that we need to be reminded that this is a Christian country and we should be treated with dignity and respect.
And I assume, Dwayne, you've been preaching in the street, taking your message beyond the church for a long time?
For a very long time.
Have you ever had this happen before?
I've had it happen before, but not this aggressive, because I believe that they wanted to prove a statement which to shut us down basically from preaching the gospel. So 5 police officers came and they were very...
It's completely shocking, actually.
You're going to tell me next they turned up in a police van?
Yep, they turned in the police van.
Oh, they didn't. I said that as a joke.
5 of them, and then you can see them walking to us. And I was thinking, OK, what's this about? And then they begin to ask different questions, and then they begin to get very aggressive when we were standing our ground, because they thought that we were just going to be silent. And
how many of you were there from the church, your church?
So there was 3 of us from the church there.
Right.
And we were all preaching from the Bible.
You don't look the violent type.
No, definitely not. In fact, from the public, everyone was saying, what are you doing? We want them to preach.
Yeah.
They're celebrating us, applauding us, because we've got a good reputation with the community, and many people, even the comments, are coming to our support. And you can see my demeanour. I was very polite, very respectful. They tried to trigger me. They tried to threaten me. I'm going to put you in a police van. They tried to, you know, bully us into submission to them. But I just made it clear that I just want to know, why are you requesting these details before I give my details? And they weren't having none of that.
So where does this leave you now in terms of preaching?
Yes, so our mission is the Great Commission, and I'm still going to proclaim the gospel of Jesus Christ. And I just want everyone to be aware that we are not going to be silent. We're well within our rights. Section 9, Section 10, freedom of expression, freedom of religion, and these are to protect us from proclaiming the message of the gospel. And I want the police to be reminded of this.
And I just struggle to think how reading something from a Bible can be interpreted as a hate crime.
You've got the Bible there,
yes,
with the exact passage in it.
Yes.
Can you just read us? It's not too long, is it?
No,
just read us that passage again.
1 verse The book of John, chapter 3, verse 16. The Bible says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life." I don't see that as a hate crime.
No.
I see it as a message of love to whoever believes will not perish, but have everlasting life. It's a beautiful message.
Do you feel, as a Christian pastor, increasingly that people are trying to marginalise or even persecute?
I feel there's a two-tier system. So when it comes to Christians, like you said, they're trying to marginalise, they're trying to silence us. But when it comes to other groups, they're allowed to express their religion loud and clear. But when a Christian comes on the street and begins to present the gospel, there's a problem. I say the football fans are not ashamed to lift up their football teams. The homosexuals are not ashamed to go on marches. Different groups are not ashamed to march on London Bridge and shout and scream. But when the Christian comes on the street and present the gospel, then the police come in like a flood, 5 of them, try to silence us just like they did.
We saw it just a couple of weeks ago.
Yes.
The woman who was singing hymns.
Exactly.
In London, in Oxford Street.
Yeah, that was Harmony London, who was singing outside John Lewis when she was approached by a volunteer police officer who said she couldn't sing songs outside of church grounds, although Scotland Yard has since apologised for that. So how did this end?
Yeah, so it ended... They basically wanted us just to move on. So they just remained there and they said they're not going to stop until we just moved on. But it was coming to our end anyway, so we decided to just move on. But they were adamant that we're here, and if you don't move on, so I had to give my details first of all. After I gave my details, they're adamant that we had to move on from preaching our religion.
And just remind us what your church is called.
So my church is called the Potter's House Church in Uxbridge.
Potter's House Church in Uxbridge.
Yeah, I'm a pastor of the church. My name is Pastor Dwayne Lopez. UB8 1ES, and we have our service at 1 p.m. on Sundays and on Wednesdays 7:30 p.m. in Uxbridge. And I welcome all to come and support.
Maybe those police officers should come.
They should come
and see what goes on in your church.
This hasn't deterred you.
No, it has not deterred me.
Your work.
In fact, it's put a fire in me to present a message to other street preachers that the UK are behind us, because the comments are giving us so much support. Well, we're working us up.
We've had dozens and dozens of messages supporting you here, and that's even before you came on. Now, the Met Police have released this statement.
And it says that officers were responding to a report from the member of the public that a group of people were making racist and homophobic comments. The Met does not tolerate hate crime, and officers responded to investigate this. We have watched the body-worn video of the full exchange. There were no arrests.
They should be apologising, frankly.
They should definitely be apologising. There's absolutely no hate crime. There was no racist behaviour.
When were you last accused of being a racist?
Never. Never, ever. That is shocking. And, yeah, I'm upset about that.
Yeah, if you get an apology, let us know. Thanks for coming in.
Telling what happened to you, and
Pastor
hopefully
Dwayne
you're
Lopez.
comforted by all the support that you're getting.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dwayne.
Yeah, up next we're discussing anti-Semitism, which I'm afraid has reached an all-time high. Don't go anywhere. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
So the highway code was amended recently. Passed me by, but anyway, a new poll suggests this has made no difference to the safety of road users, and I could believe that.
Yeah, there was an awful crash in London, wasn't there? A bus and a pedestrian yesterday.
Fatality.
So we're asking, is the highway code fit for purpose, or should we just scrap it altogether? That's our debate this morning, and we're joined by Danny Kelly. She argues highways are not fit for purpose, and cycling instructor Anna Hughes thinks they are. Good morning to you both.
You see, Anna, I think it's a good thing. I think the highway code is a good thing. I just don't think that any of us pay any attention to it, or we should all be tested on it quite regularly, I would have thought. We should have revision courses in it.
Yeah, I think you just summed it up, Eamon, by saying the changes passed you by. I actually asked a few of my fellow cyclists and pedestrians, what is classified as vulnerable road users, about this very thing. I said, has the new highway code made things safer for you? And most people said, not at all. Drivers don't know what it is. They don't know what the changes are. They probably don't know what the rules are to start with. And as you've just said, doing refreshers is a really good idea. It's a bit bizarre that we're given a license to operate this quite dangerous machinery, and then we're never tested again, and especially not on the highway code, which is, especially when it changes, why wouldn't we be retested on that or have to do refresher courses on it? You know, there are conflicts on the road, there are fatalities. It makes sense to be aware of what the highway code says, because it is there to keep us safe.
Yeah, Danny Kelly, when I think back, I think it was 1999 I passed my driving test. Hardly any bikes on the road then, to be honest, probably virtually none.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Welcome back to Britain's Newsroom on GB News. A report by a Jewish charity has found that more than 4,000 anti-Semitic incidents were recorded in the UK last year, and the majority took place after the October the 7th Hamas attacks.
Well, joining us now is the author of Lily's Promise, Dov Foreman. Morning to you. These figures, Dov, and very good to have you on the programme again, are shocking. Can I just read you something Danny Cohen has written in The Telegraph today about anti-Semitism? He says, in Hertfordshire, the head teacher of a Jewish school received this racist threat. Beware, jihad is being fought and you're going to have your throat slit by us. The threat also referred to beheadings. How common is this sort of talk?
As you say, this year we've seen the largest rise in anti-Semitism on record, 147% increase from the previous year, and 2/3 of those anti-Semitic incidences came after the October 7th massacre by Hamas terrorists in Israel on October 7th. And that's incredibly worrying, the fact that we Jewish people knew on the day of the October 7th, when we were hearing about these atrocities unfolding, that perhaps even that day or in the days following, anti-Semitism would rise before there was even a response from Israel. And, you know, people disguise their anti-Semitism under the guise that they're just protesting against Israel or for a free Palestine. But that's not the case. There was a story only last week of a Jewish school student from one of the high schools going home, and he was pinned against the wall, punched in the face and told to say free Palestine. And I think actually it's because of social media that we're seeing so many young children say things in schools to other students, to their teachers, which are plainly anti-Semitic and extremist. And they're not only anti-Semitic, but they're also anti-West. And it's incredibly dangerous, and I think so much more needs to be done. This report just sheds a light on the worries that all Jewish people knew to be true of the increase in anti-Semitism since October 7th, but in this year alone.
Dov, we should make it clear, in case not everybody knows, that your great-grandmother is Lily Ebert, an Auschwitz survivor, 100 years old now. What does she make of this? What on earth is her reaction to it?
For the Holocaust survivors, like my great-grandmother, it's so difficult to see this anti-Semitism. My great-grandmother hoped that the vow would never again would be upheld. Unfortunately, it hasn't. Jewish people once again feel unsafe on our streets, and we're not in the 1930s in Germany, but we're here in the United Kingdom, and the great litmus test of post-Holocaust emancipation was meant to be whether Jewish students like myself could wear a kippah and go onto university campus and learn in freedom and in safety like everyone else. And unfortunately, at the moment, in the United Kingdom, we're failing in that test. I'm the great-grandson, as you say, of a Holocaust survivor, and I don't feel safe sometimes on my own university campus here in London. Last Saturday night, some of my friends called me and they said that they were walking to synagogue wearing kippah on Leeds University campus. They were walking towards the Hillel House. And someone screamed out of their window, "Are you Jewish?" To which they replied, "Yes." And he tried to ram them. And that's the story in his Telegraph. And that's what it feels like. And that's the reality of being a Jewish student today on campus, in schools, but also just being Jewish on our streets.
Dov, I'm so sorry.
It's terrible. And so we've got to leave you as well because we're out of time, but we are going to return to this story in the programme because these figures are shocking. And we are going to talk in the latest shameless stunt of Harry and Meghan.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, very good morning to you. Alex Burkill here with your latest GB News weather forecast. For many, it's going to be pretty cloudy and rather wet today, but in the southeast, it's actually likely to stay largely dry, and here we should have some brightness at times. A very different story for most other places, though. Often quite cloudy, some persistent rain already to start across many northern and western areas, and that rain is likely to turn heavier across parts of the southwest later on. It is a mild day, though. Temperatures could be even higher than yesterday, with highs of around 16 or 17 Celsius, so exceptionally high for the time of year. As we go through the evening, we're going to see more heavy rain affecting southern areas, and that swathe of wet weather pushes its way a little bit further eastwards, affecting parts of the southeast overnight. Otherwise, we will see some clear breaks developing, but also a scattering of showery outbreaks of rain, particularly towards the north. Sticking with some milder air across the UK, so I'm not expecting temperatures to drop a huge amount, some places staying in double figures. Through tomorrow, a decent amount of sunshine perhaps across eastern parts at first, but a bit more cloud feeding in as we go through the day. Elsewhere, a few sunny spells perhaps, but also a few outbreaks of showery rain here and there. But on the whole, a quieter, drier day than today for most. And with that, though, temperatures a few degrees lower, not quite as exceptionally mild. As we head towards the weekend, and we are likely to see another weather system bring some heavy rain as we go through Saturday, but that clears through, and so Sunday at the moment looks like the driest day. Bye-bye.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Patrick Christie's Tonight. Weekdays from 9 p.m.
So a new poll has revealed that Gen Z or Gen Z, I don't know how I'm supposed to say it, and British boys and men are more likely to believe that feminism has done more harm than good when compared with older respondents. So the polling also found that a quarter of UK males aged 16 to 29 believe it's harder to be a man than a woman, with 1 in 5 looking favourably upon controversial influencer Andrew Tate. 37% of them also agree that the phrase toxic masculinity is unhelpful. So, with Gen Z boys increasingly holding this view, has feminism done more harm than good? Let me know your thoughts. Email me, gbviews@gbnews.com, tweet me @gbnews, and make sure you take part in our poll. But I'll bring you those results shortly. Going head-to-head on this tonight, our author and commentator Anna May Mangan and YouTuber and social media influencer Pearl Davies. Both of you, thank you very much. Pearl, I'll start with you. Has feminism done more harm than good, especially when it comes to these Gen Z boys?
Yes, it has. Feminism really has turned into a bunch of crybaby women that want to complain that we're not given equal opportunity when really women are given more opportunity than men. And so, yeah, I would say feminism is a hate group and it's a bunch of crybaby women.
Anna, would you like to come back to that? Crybaby women feminism, apparently.
So we've got a right lad with us tonight with Pearl and her opinions, haven't we? How could it possibly do harm? Pearl wouldn't do, I hope you vote. I assume you do. I hope you're not chained to the kitchen sink at home. I'm not sure if you've got a job, so I don't know very much about you, but if there's a bloke doing the same thing as you, you're probably earning less than him. So of course feminism is something that it got us the vote in the first place, and it's still doing a power of good. It's just whingy men, and actually I changed that. They're lads, they're not men.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
It's 11 a.m. on Thursday, the 15th of February. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Pip Thompson.
Britain is in recession. Chancellor Jeremy Hunt says low economic growth is not a surprise and the UK must stick to the plan. We'll hear from the Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves next.
And anti-Semitism has hit an all-time high after the Hamas terror attacks on Israel. It's being described as an explosion of hatred by one British Jewish charity.
Putin backs Biden. The Russian President Vladimir Putin has said he would like to see Joe Biden win the next US presidential election.
And gang crime crackdown. A GB News exclusive report reveals barbershops, you'll have noticed how many more there are in your high street, are being exploited by criminals to launder money and employ illegal immigrants.
There's broader organised crime behind this. These sorts of premises do not pop up overnight without money behind them.
Do get in touch with us this morning, gbviews@gbnews.com. We did a really interesting interview a little earlier with a gospel preacher who was threatened with arrest by police.
5 of them, 5 police officers arriving in a van, preaching from the gospel.
Yeah.
And he read out the passage that caused offence, didn't offend me.
Yeah, and
he was accused of homophobia. I'm gay, nothing homophobic about what he'd said in that passage.
Yeah, well, it's enraged quite a lot of you this morning. Do keep your thoughts coming in. We will be reading some of them out very shortly. First, let's get the latest news headlines with Tatiana.
Thank you. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. The UK economy has officially entered recession. Figures from the Office for National Statistics shows that the UK economy shrank by 0.3% at the end of last year. It follows another period of decline of 0.1% in the previous 3 months. A recession is defined as 2 consecutive 3-month periods where the economy contracts rather than grows. It's the first time the UK has entered recession since the first half of 2020 after the first COVID lockdown. Chancellor Jeremy Hunt says despite the drop in GDP, the economy is turning a corner.
We always expected growth to be weaker while we prioritised tackling inflation. That means higher interest rates. And that's the right thing to do because you can't have long-term healthy growth with high inflation. But also for families, when there's a cost of living crisis, when the cost of their weekly shop is going up, their energy bills are much higher, it's the right thing to do. The underlying picture here is an economy that is more resilient than most people predicted. Inflation is coming down, real wages have been going up now for 6 months. And if we stick to our guns, independent forecasters say that by the early summer we could start to see interest rates falling.
Meanwhile, more than 3 million low-income households in England struggled to pay their energy bills last year. Government figures found that 13% were in fuel poverty, largely unchanged from the year before. It's also been revealed that well over a third of English households were forced to spend more than 10% of their income after housing costs on the energy bills. Breaking news this hour, a 16-year-old boy has died after being stabbed in the St Philip's area of Bristol yesterday morning. He was attacked in Rawnsley Park by 2 people wearing a mask who then fled the scene on bicycles. A murder investigation has been launched. This, of course, coming weeks after the deaths of teenagers Mason Wrist and Matt Dixon, who was stabbed in the Knoll West area of the city. More on this story as we get it. More than 4,000 anti-Semitic incidents were recorded in the UK last year. That's an all-time high. The figures more than double the previous all-time high in 2021 and marks a rise of 589% compared to 2022. The soaring figures being put down to the sheer volume which took place following the Hamas attacks of 7th of October. Let's take you now to the Shadow Chancellor's reaction to the UK economy going into recession.
It's absolutely clear that Britain remains trapped in a spiral of economic decline. This isn't a question of lines on a graph. It's about the health of our high streets, about growing businesses, secure, well-paid jobs, and money in the pockets of working people. The British people did not need to see these figures today to tell them that the economy is not working, that we are in the midst of a cost of living crisis, and that they are worse off. But these numbers shine a spotlight on the scale of that failure. The confirmation of recession exposes a government and a Prime Minister completely out of touch with the realities on the ground. A government that for too long has looked on economic failure with complacency, content to be the managers of decline. Rishi Sunak claims that he has a plan, but the plan is not working. He claims that the economy has turned a corner, but the economy is shrinking. He claims he doesn't want to take us back to square one, but we are going backwards. The Prime Minister's claims are in tatters. The cornerstone of his leadership has been shattered. The promise to grow the economy has been broken. Our economy is now smaller than when Rishi Sunak entered 10 Downing Street in 2022. Having spent years in the slow lane, Rishi Sunak has now put our economy into reverse. This is Rishi's recession, and it is the British people who will pay the price. This is simply the latest chapter in a long story of economic failure and stagnation, a story that reaches back more than a decade, felt in stagnant household incomes, in the decay of our high streets, and in creeping insecurity. I often think of a young family I met in Worthing almost 2 years ago now. A mum and a dad, working 5 jobs between them, struggling to make ends meet, constantly juggling work and childcare. As a family, they only get half a day a week together. They felt that any hope of buying a home of their own had evaporated. Good people, working hard. And do you know what the mum said to me? She said, "You just wonder if you're doing something wrong." Well, something has gone profoundly wrong, because an economy that isn't working for working people isn't working at all. It is time that the Conservative Party took some responsibility. The origins of many of the crises that we have faced are global: pandemic, war, energy crisis. But their consequences have been exacerbated by the choices of Conservative governments. Each time crisis has hit, Britain has been acutely exposed. First, austerity that choked off investment. Next, years of political instability which has fueled economic instability. Brexit without a plan. The Conservatives' mini-budget, sending mortgages and interest rates soaring. 5 prime ministers. 7 chancellors. 11 plans for growth, each yielding less than the last. If the UK economy had grown at the average rate of other OECD economies over the past decade, it would now be £140 billion larger, equivalent to £5,000 per household every year. That would also mean an additional £50 billion in tax revenues to invest in our crumbling public services. Today, the average British family is 20% worse off than their German counterparts. 1 in 3 working-age families have less than £1,000 in savings. And the typical family renewing their mortgage this year will find themselves paying an additional £240 every month.
That was Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves with what you would probably expect was a pretty withering assessment of the government and the economy. She was reacting to Britain being in a technical recession. Well, let's get some reaction to this.
Yeah, we're going to talk to the Chief Economic Advisor at the Centre for Economic and Business Research, Vicky Price. Vicky, morning. We expect the Labour Party to make political capital where they can. Of course, that's their job. How serious is this? Is it, and we keep hearing the expression technical recession. What does that mean?
It means that we had 2 quarters of negative growth. And one of the reasons for that, of course, is that quite a lot of revisions were made to the data. We knew that October was bad. It now seems that it was even worse than we had anticipated originally. Remember, very bad weather that month. People didn't go out shopping for clothes or anything like that. Then we got November with Black Friday, things improved. Then we got December, which wasn't very good itself. But November itself, which was okay, is now looked at as having done even worse than we thought originally. So the growth was less than we thought. So there have been revisions on the data, which ended up with us losing 0.1% of GDP as a result of that in the last quarter. So 2 quarters of recession means a technical recession. And overall, for 2023, we grew up 0.1%. Not very much.
It seems it's as much about stagnation, Vicky, as anything else.
Yes, but of course, it's interesting when you look at 2024, because I was just listening to Rachel Reeves talk about what's happening to people's pockets. We've seen so far is that there are some indications of things improving. Services sector is doing a lot better. So the last data from businesses is that services output is expanding, has expanded in fact the last few months. Manufacturing is not dropping as fast as it had done before. Even construction showing some signs of recovery. And also, of course, people have a little bit more money in their pockets because of the cut in the national insurance contributions. They're seeing inflation come down, so real wages are rising, and they are now being promised sweeteners in the budget to come on March the 6th, maybe more when there is another budget supposedly in September, if the election is indeed in October or November.
Vicky, Rachel Reeves there was talking about Rishi's recession. She was indulging in a little bit of nice alliteration. Is that completely fair, though, calling it Rishi's recession?
Well, what is interesting to see is the extent to which interest rates have gone up, perhaps more than they needed to have done, because we had slightly higher inflation, well, considerably higher inflation in the UK. You may argue that this is because the government had not intervened early enough to affect inflationary expectations. So everyone thought that prices were going to be rising very significantly. So we had strikes, we had wage demands. So in a way, what has been going on for businesses is that wages have been increasing quite significantly, more than has been the case elsewhere in nominal terms. And that has brought many people into paying more tax, even though their real incomes were going down. So we've had that issue, really, that a lot has been drained out of the economy by this government. So she's right in a way to say that this has contributed to the fact that people had not gone out to spend, that inflation is higher than it would otherwise have been, and that interest rates have been higher than they would otherwise have been, and you could argue higher than in other countries. So that's perhaps a justified thing to say, but everyone's been suffering all across. We've seen Japan now in recession, we've seen Europe in real trouble, except the US, of course, which is still sort of doing rather well by comparison to the rest of us.
And just finally, Vicky, someone was saying, well, technically, although we're in a technical recession, we're technically also out of recession. Can you explain what that means?
Well, it means that we're likely to be growing in the next quarter. In this quarter we're in, is probably going to be a positive one. As I said, indicators are moving in that direction. And of course, in an interesting way, if you start from a sort of relatively low base, you're likely to be doing quite well in the future, even with a little bit of growth. But whether that means anything serious in terms of getting economic growth back to where we used to be, that's very, very unlikely. So 2024 will only do well in terms of people's ability to spend, and also businesses in a way, if taxes come down and there are many more giveaways that will perhaps, if you like, redress some of the trends we've seen until the end of last year.
Vicky Price, Chief Economic Advisor, Centre for Economic and Business Research. Thanks so much for your analysis this morning.
Very interesting, isn't it? Very interesting. Now, very serious story. A 16-year-old boy has died after being stabbed in Bristol.
Avon and Somerset police say the incident happened in the St Philip's area last night.
His death comes as the latest knife sentencing figures are released, showing a 17% rise in the number of knife offences over the last decade.
Joining us now in the studio is our reporter, Charlie Peters. Charlie, what more do we know about this?
So this 16-year-old boy killed last night in Bristol, was stabbed in a park and ran to a road nearby, was picked up by a driver, and Avon and Somerset police said he collapsed nearby and died at the scene. They also said that the two attackers escaped on bicycles and were wearing masks. And this comes just 2 weeks after 2 teenagers were also killed in another knife attack in Bristol. And concurrently this morning, the Chief Constable of Avon and Somerset Police, Sarah Crewe, announced that her force was launching a new high-profile and proactive campaign to tackle knife crime. I imagine that those plans and that announcement was some days in the works, and so for the announcement of another killing by knives at the same time is of course really drawing extended attention to the situation. Now, Sarah Crewe did also say that knife crime is as much a community and public health problem as it is a criminal justice problem. And her comments come at the same time as this morning the latest knife and offensive weapons statistics were released by the ONS, showing across the decade up to the month of September 2023, a 17% increase in the number of offences related to possession or threat using either a blade, a pointed weapon or an offensive weapon over the last decade, a 17% rise. However, the statistics also revealed that the immediate average custodial sentence for these offences has risen to 7.8 months, which is a rise across the same period from 7.2. 7.8 months, that's correct, for possession or use in threat.
7.8 months, as in...
Not quite 8 months.
Not quite 8 months.
Not very serious, is it? I mean, what happened to zero tolerance?
Well, the mandatory maximum sentence for possession of a blade in England and Wales is, I believe, 4 years.
Yeah.
Yesterday we saw a man sentenced to 8 months for possession of a blade. Remarkable footage in Elephant and Castle as off-duty police officers swarmed this man as he was threatening and beating a man with a dog and a weapon. He was sentenced yesterday to 8 months and also 4 months for a fray, but he'll serve those concurrently.
Right.
So interesting statistics, 17% rise and that average sentence rising to 7.8.
Yeah.
I suppose there's no room in the prisons to put them in for any longer.
Well, they're overcrowded, aren't they? By hundreds of people.
Very worrying.
But the breaking news is that this 16-year-old boy has died after being stabbed in the St Philip's area of Bristol last night, and that has come from Avon and Somerset Police. Thanks very much, Charlie, and we will stay across that developing news.
Still to come. Barbershops, the new front to employ illegal migrants and to launder money. Well, we were given exclusive access to a raid in Oxford. You don't want to miss it.
You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Martin Daubney. Weekdays from 3 p.m.
Or they're trying to make it better, or they're trying to make it slower, a lot slower. Slower enough, in fact, for it to sufficiently allow the boats to start coming in to cause further political damage to Rishi Sunak.
Which it will do if it carries on.
Of course it will. And this is the Labour peers, the Lib Dem peers, and no doubt some of the Conservative wets, bandying together, causing political damage to Rishi Sunak. And the longer it goes on, the worse it will be for the Conservative Party.
There's now a deadline on the Rwanda plan. It's got to start working this summer to have any electoral benefit for Rishi Sunak, because of course if the election is in November, by then the crossings will slow down. It's got to be up and running by about May or June, and then they'll take it from there.
Cool. And you have a crumb of comfort for us. Rishi Sunak met a Prime Minister.
Well, a crumb of comfort for those who want to stop the boat, certainly, or we'll get towards it. The PM today met Alexander De Croo, who's a Belgian Prime Minister. They've agreed a UK-Belgium law enforcement cooperation agreement. In short, that is a focus on surveillance and information, ultimately, which should help stop the boats. Not many boats make crossings from Belgium, but it's the kind of they can hopefully use law enforcement. These are the kind of deals which Sir Keir Starmer's talking about. If he becomes Prime Minister, he'll do more of these deals with countries on the continent, and this shows that the Tory PM can do them too.
And there may be intelligence sharing of crime gangs that operate within Belgium. As you say, it's a much, much further distance, much more perilous across the North Sea. Very unlikely that people will be leaving in any great numbers from Belgium. But nevertheless, is this of note, or is it a token victory against the backdrop of domestic
it's
loss?
interesting they can do it with Belgium and not do it with the European Union, because so far we've been told the returns agreements can't be agreed with individual countries because they've got the European Union to talk to. Maybe this deal can be mirrored with France, and that might help with better cooperation, because basically after Brexit we're a sovereign country. We have to work on some areas more closely with our European neighbours.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
11:20 with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Pip Thompson.
We're also joined by author and broadcaster Nikki Hodgson and broadcaster and journalist Carol Malone in the studio. Good morning to you both.
Morning.
We want to talk first about GB News being told of an explosion in the number of barbershops in particular, which are now being exploited by criminals to launder money and employ illegal migrants. Our Home and Security editor Mark White reports.
Heading into this suburb of Oxford, these immigration enforcement officers are en route to raid a local barber shop. It's suspected of employing illegal immigrants. Part of a growing phenomenon where these high street businesses are being increasingly exploited as fronts for criminality. These officers are looking for an Albanian asylum seeker who's absconded and believed to be working here. While there's no trace of him, they have detained this Colombian man, another asylum seeker working here in breach of employment laws. As officers continue to search this business, the Albanian owner arrived. He now faces the prospect of a much higher fine, with tougher penalties for businesses introduced this week of up to £45,000 for each immigrant caught working illegally.
Immigration enforcement raids are up by nearly 70% last year. That's a huge increase. And talking to the illegal enforcement team here, they've been ramping up in the West Midlands as well. You can really sense it. You can sense the work they're doing, and that work is going to continue.
Across the country, the number of barber shops has exploded, almost 18,000 in total, up 50% in just a few years. While most are perfectly legitimate and a valuable addition to the high street, sources have told us that increasing numbers of barber shops are fronts for criminality. Billions of pounds from the proceeds of crime are laundered through these businesses, which don't just employ illegal immigrants, but are often involved in modern slavery, coercing and threatening victims of human trafficking to work for little to nothing.
There is broader organised crime behind this. These sorts of premises do not pop up overnight without money behind them. And it's really important that we work with agencies such as National Crime Agency, such as policing, such as HMRC and other government departments, ensure that the weight of all the government's powers is brought to bear on those who seek to exploit vulnerable individuals.
Nail bars and car washes have long been associated with criminal gangs, often employing and exploiting illegal immigrants. But sources say barber shops are rapidly overtaking them as a front for criminality. The authorities are keen to reiterate that the majority of barbers are legitimate and law-abiding, but they say they won't hesitate to go after those they suspect of breaking the law. Mark White, GB News.
I've always had suspicions about some of those barbershops. There's so many of them.
Yeah, well, one viewer has written in saying he's got around 8 barbershops in approximately 300 yards where he lives.
I've always been, but that was a great report. But now Nikki's still with us and Carol Malone. We want to talk about this explosion in anti-Semitism. It's really shocking, Carol. There's just Danny Cohen's written a really interesting piece in the Telegraph about it, saying Saturday morning, a visibly Jewish man is walking home from a Sabbath morning service when a group of people attending a pro-Palestinian rally approach him and shout, "We're going to rape your mother, you dirty Jew." And then they assaulted him.
And, you know, it's kind of anti-Semitism is normalised now. It's become normalised, I think. You know, the report that's out today from the Jewish Security Community Trust is saying that there were 4,000 incidents against Jewish people recorded last year, which I think was 1,662 the year before. So that's what's happened since the attack on Israel on October the 7th. So it is... They are suffering an explosion of hate, and I think the problem is, you know, it hasn't been helped by the way the Labour Party. I'm not even sure we can discuss this. The way the Labour Party have handled what's happened in the last week. And let's talk about what's happened historically with the Labour Party. In January this year, Kate Osamor, MP, had to be suspended for making anti-Semitic comments by saying that Gaza should be made a genocide. Last year, Diane Abbott was suspended from the party for saying that the Jewish people suffered no more racism or criticism than people with ginger hair. The year before that, it was Corbyn. The year before that, it was Chris Williamson. It is now... Starmer keeps telling us that he's dealt with this problem. He clearly hasn't dealt with this problem. And he certainly didn't deal with the problem last week quickly enough. He waited a whole day after the comments that were made. And only when the clamour of disgust got so loud did he act. He wanted to make it so that Ali stayed in position to fight the by-election. We can't talk there. I'm going to stop about it there.
So what about anti-Semitism? I mean, why is anti-Semitism... I mean, this has been tracked back to October the 7th, not Israel's response to the Hamas attack. But it started on October the 7th, on the day that Hamas launched that bloody assault on Israel, the worst assault on Israel for 50 years.
Yeah, I mean, the worst assault on the Jewish people since the Holocaust. I mean, if you've been to Auschwitz, and I have, you never get over it. It is the most devastating place. And it really hammers home how much Jews have struggled. I mean, as a child, I grew up in Yorkshire. We used to go to Clifford's Tower in York, where hundreds of Jews were massacred in about, I think it was about 1140. And we learned that as a story at school about... That was trying to tell us that anti-Semitism has a long history and we've got to pay attention to make sure those things don't happen again. But they are happening again globally. And the other thing, I think, is we had a warning about this from what happened in France and Germany about 10, 15 years ago. Do you remember all the swastikas painted on graves and all that kind of stuff that happened? It's been building up and building up. People, for some reason, think that actually you can't be anti-Semitic anymore, and that it's kind of just passed. There are these tropes about Jewish people that are just taken as given, and it's just appalling.
I want to just read out a message we've had from Jules. Good morning on this. And you, Jules, say, I'm the child of Irish immigrants who never experienced hate from anybody in London, even during the heinous IRA bombings. Nobody marched spouting anti-Irish rhetoric and threatened us either.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I'm from Irish stock as well, so yeah, I think that's a very, very valid point.
But it's normalised in the sense we saw two very clear incidents this week. The three women who went to court for wearing the paraglider things on the back, they have a conviction, but it's not what they were taken to court for. It was almost that they almost got away with it by saying they had done nothing wrong. Also, there was a comedian called, was it Curry? Paul Curry? Paul Curry, who was performing in a London theatre this week, and he brought a Palestinian flag onto the stage, and which made everybody chant, and the people who didn't stand up to chant, he said, why aren't you chanting? They said, because we're Jewish. And then he got the audience to turn on him.
The gentleman who was hounded out
came in with us yesterday.
Was sitting here yesterday and told us what happened. And that first story you talked about, this is about the judge, isn't it? Tanwir Ikram.
Who?
Where the sentencing of these women, because they walked free, they displayed parachute images
on their backs.
March. There is going to be a review of their sentencing because that judge apparently liked a post on
pro-Palestinian tweet, which
he said he reposted by mistake.
You can't do that.
He reposted
a load of rubbish. If that's what a judge does, he's not capable of being a judge. I'm sorry, because we expect judges to be of the highest intellectual order.
The symbol they were wearing, those women on their back, was the mechanism by which the Hamas terrorists got into Israel, paragliders.
Gentlemen, I do need to interrupt, only because we heard from the Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves a little earlier. There's a press conference happening, and our business and economics editor Liam Halligan was there and asked this question.
Now, I have never seen anything like it, with a Chancellor giving a running commentary. It is dangerous and it is very misguided, and I would urge him to stop this because it creates the uncertainty that is that we really don't need. We haven't got the numbers that the Chancellor has got to inform the budget process. I think that he gets his final numbers from the OBR yesterday or today on the outlook for the economy and for public finances. I've made no secret of the fact that I want taxes on working people to be lower, but I've also been really clear, including in the speech today, that I will never make a promise where I can't say where the money is going to come from. So I can't make those promises. One thing that I would do, though, and this is a plan that we've already set out, is to get going with our plan for growth, to grow the economy, to create those jobs and those investments with the National Wealth Fund and GB Energy and those planning reforms, because in the end, the biggest challenge that the UK economy faces is that lack of growth and investment, and we can't turn anything round in our economy unless we can get that uplifting growth, and that would be my #1 priority if I was Chancellor of the Exchequer. I take a question now from George Parker and the FT.
OK, so that was Rachel Reeves answering a question from Liam Halligan about what would she do if she was Chancellor.
Yeah. We were talking...
Yes.
So the judge...
We're talking about the judge who liked a tweet, a pro-Palestinian tweet. Now, you can't have a man passing sentence on 3 women the previous day and then liking a pro-Palestinian tweet, because that is clear. It's not anti-Semitic, but he's taken a side.
I'm not sure it wasn't the other way round, Carol, that he liked the social media post.
Yes,
and
I think it was historical.
Well, whatever it was, you can't,
either way.
you can't have someone who was supposed to be neutral.
Impartial.
Impartial, and he clearly isn't impartial. And I know there is worry now. I think the Express has done the story today. There is worry about that sentence because they're saying he wasn't impartial. Yeah. But it is astonishing now how we're not as disgusted and outraged as we should be when we hear this stuff, when we heard it this week, when the party that could win the election this year. It is incredible that in this day and age, while there are still Holocaust survivors still alive, that we're experiencing this horror, this most...
And we talked to a guy earlier in the programme whose great-grandmother is a Holocaust survivor.
Yeah, Lily
she's had messages...
100 years old.
And she's had messages from people saying, how did Hitler miss you?
You're kidding.
It just
She was a Holocaust survivor.
Right. And why aren't we acting on that?
Carol, hold that thought, because we do need to go to your latest news headlines. We will be back very shortly, but first, here's Tatiana.
Pippa, thank you. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom this morning. Chancellor Jeremy Hunt says despite the UK entering recession, the economy is turning a corner. Official figures show the economy shrank by 0.3% at the end of last year, following a period of decline in the previous 3 months. It's the first time the UK's GDP has dropped since the first half of 2020 after the first COVID lockdown. Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves says the Prime Minister's completely out of touch with the realities on the ground, adding his economic pledge is in tatters. Meanwhile, more than 3 million low-income households in England struggled to pay their energy bills last year. Government figures found that 13% were in fuel poverty, largely unchanged from the year before. It's also been revealed that well over a third of English households were forced to spend more than 10% of their income on their energy bills. More than 4,000 anti-Semitic incidents were recorded in the UK last year, an all-time high. The figures more than double the previous all-time high in 2021 and marks a rise of 589% compared to 2022. The soaring figures being put down to the sheer volume which took place following the Hamas attacks of October 7th. The Community Security Trust, a charity which provides protection for British Jews against anti-Semitic attacks, said the explosion in hatred is an absolute disgrace. And the Duke and Duchess of Sussex are on a 3-day visit in Canada. Prince Harry and Meghan have been visiting the winter training camp of the Invictus Games 1 year prior to the event. The pair spent time with athletes and tournament staff in Vancouver and military veterans. Harry founded the Paralympic-style sporting competition in 2014 for injured and sick military personnel and veterans to aid their recovery. For the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen, or you can go to gbnews.com/alerts.
for exclusive, limited edition and rare gold coins that are always newsworthy. Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2553 and 1.1690 euros. The price of gold is £1,590 and 60 pence per ounce, and the FTSE 100 at 7,564 points.
Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Afternoon, they're here. Good afternoon, Britain, with Tom and Emily. Well, hello.
We've got a lot coming up on the show. This judge, Tan Ikram.
Extraordinary.
Just talking about him. Well, you were just talking about him. Well, I'm interested to know what you think, because Suella Braverman's come out saying that the sentence or lack of sentence should be reviewed. What does this mean for the judge liking a post that clearly puts him on the pro-Palestine, anti-Israel, liking a post that called Israel a terrorist? He can't possibly say he's impartial.
No, and of course we were surprised at the sentence, convicted, but they walked free.
And I think the maximum sentence could have been 6 months in prison.
Yeah. And you'd have expected at least a bit of custodial time, or even a touch of community service. But no,
and the judge says he did it by retweeted it or reposted it by mistake. Really?
I don't think we believe that, seeing as he has reportedly now deleted his LinkedIn account altogether, which would suggest that he wanted to make sure that there wasn't anything else there that might be used against him. But we're going to be speaking to some great legal minds on this.
Good.
Lots of people think that perhaps this judge wasn't right for this particular case.
But also, here's a list of countries that have something in common today. Ireland, Denmark, the Netherlands, Austria, Finland, Sweden, Norway. We've all joined the recession club.
Yes, exactly.
And so this is a really interesting point, because the UK and, let's face it, all of Europe has been oscillating really between very marginally above the line and very marginally below the line ever since COVID, really. We now have had 2 successive quarters very marginally below the line. Now, in all likelihood, the next quarter will be very marginally above the line. What's the big story here? Not a 2008-style recession, not a big depression, but flatlining growth. It's not a good story, but my goodness, has that word become a big media sort of linchpin?
And Sadiq Khan's revamp of
the
overground, Goodness me, I have a lot to say about this.
Favourite story of the day, Andrew.
I have a lot to say.
£6.5 million down there. Just make the trains work on time,
Sadiq
Mr.
Khan
Mayor.
wants us to be talking about his woke revamp of the overground that's costing us £6.3 million, reportedly. But he's just made a huge gaffe, really.
Excruciating
so we'll be playing that out for you.
I'm looking forward to that.
It's honestly, you will your jaw will drop when you hear the words that came out of Sadiq Khan's mouth about 15 minutes ago.
OK, Tom.
Looking forward to that.
It's got nothing to do with the overground.
We need to go. We'll talk to you very soon again. For now, though, you are with Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Farage, Monday to Thursday from 7 p.m.
Lots of people have different ideas, but principally a conservative approach to getting growth is to reduce taxes so that people, ordinary people and businesses can spend more of their own money to invest and grow the economy.
So the theory is that you cut taxes and that then pumps more money into the economy.
Exactly right.
Growth.
And then people, it's not government that are creating wealth. It's individuals, businessmen, companies that create wealth. It's the private sector that creates wealth, that the public sector then taxes and spends.
I get the theory, but one of the criticisms of you, and I think one of the criticisms actually of all political parties, is they appear to be incapable of cutting government spending.
That's the key. I mean, and I think when I look back, is that we should have had a credible plan to reduce the increase in spending. Now, that's often a difficult concept to
explained. But it's in line with inflation, etc.
That's all right. So when you're slowing the increase, it means, you know, one year you spend £100 and the next year you spend maybe £101 as opposed to going up to £110. So the actual level isn't going down, but you're slowing the increase. And that's very much what I tried to do. And actually, looking back, the one thing I wish I'd done, was to present a credible spending plan at the same time as the tax cuts that we announced.
You had a go, it didn't work out for whatever reason, and that analysis will go on for some years to come. We have Jeremy Hunt there as Chancellor now, hinting quite strongly now there won't be any tax cuts, but the truth of it is, under 14 years of Conservatives, for a variety of reasons, the tax burden has risen.
That's right.
To the highest since the Attlee government, way back in
80 years,
1951, whatever it is.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
It's 11:40 with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Pip Thompson.
Now, a report by a Jewish charity has found that more than 4,000 anti-Semitic incidents were recorded in the UK last year.
The Community Security Trust says the total was double the previous record in 2021.
It also revealed that the majority took place after the October the 7th Hamas attacks.
So joining us now is the head of digital for the Jewish Chronicle, Josh Kaplan. Josh, good morning to you. These figures are horrifying, shocking. Can I ask, have you had any personal experience of anti-Semitism since October the 7th?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's pretty hard to find a Jewish person in this country that hasn't. I mean, for me, luckily, it was sort of on the more minor side. I was getting a haircut the other day, and I heard one of the barbers who was, cutting someone else's hair talk about the Jews and what they were doing in Israel. And I thought there for a second, do I bother saying anything? Or, I didn't. I let it go in the end. But it's just sort of symptomatic of all this stuff that's been happening. There's been violence, there's been people getting screamed at in the streets, there have been people made to feel unsafe in their own homes. Luckily, I haven't experienced any of that personally, but it's a very real thing.
And when do you think it will ever decline? Is it when this war ends?
Well,
I mean, you can't keep going through this, can you, for years to come?
Yeah, I mean, look, if you look at the sort of way these things usually go, they spike within Israel conflict and then they come back down. But, sadly, anti-Semitism has been part of life in the West and in the world all over for hundreds and hundreds of years. I think,
But at this rate is absolutely shocking, Josh. And even in schools and universities, it's surging by 100-odd%.
Yeah, and then that's what I think is really depressing, because I think, there's this discourse that we always have, which is that the young generation are supposed to be more enlightened, they're supposed to be more accepting, they're supposed to be more tolerant. And it shows from this report, at least, that doesn't seem to be the case. The CST said that there was a worrying rise in children committing acts of hate against Jewish people. And isn't that the most depressing, thing of all, is that we're educating a next generation to carry on this sort of historic hate?
How much do you think some of these major marches we've seen with people marching for Palestine, how much do you think that has contributed to the rise, Josh, in anti-Semitism? Because we know there have been reports of people making anti-Semitic comments at some of these marches, and indeed we've seen the row currently over the 3 women who were convicted of anti-Semitic offences at one of those demonstrations.
Yeah, look, I wouldn't want to label every single person that goes onto the streets as an anti-Semite, but I think what it does do is it increases the tension in this debate, increases the heat in this debate. And, when people are afraid to call it out for what it is, which is, oftentimes overspilling into anti-Semitism, it makes people think it's okay. And, I've seen some of the footage of these marches, where people have put swastikas on the Israeli flag, and people that have invoked Nazi imagery. And I think, these marches week in, week out have this, effect that raises the temperature to such a point that it spills over and ends with synagogues being targeted, Jewish schools being targeted, which is just simply unacceptable.
Josh, is it possible to criticise the Israeli government without being accused of anti-Semitism? They're two separate things, aren't they?
They are very much two separate things. And I think if you look at, you know, I'm not a massive fan of the Netanyahu government. I feel absolutely no problem with criticizing Israel. But I think if you look at the way that people criticize it, when they apply higher standards because we're a Jewish state, when they have a disproportionate, you know, amount of focus on it because we are the world's only Jewish state, that's when it becomes anti-Semitic. And if you look at a lot of the people that, you know, take the example of the paraglider women that were convicted yesterday, they weren't engaging in a sensible, rational argument about the policy aims of the Israeli government. They were celebrating terrorists that killed innocent people. And I think, you know, when you're celebrating people that are killing people for being Jewish, that's you know, when you cross the pale, really.
And worrying, it's worrying, isn't it, Josh, to hear about this is rearing its ugly head in schools. Do you think there should be more taught in schools about the history of the Jewish people and about anti-Semitism in general?
Absolutely. I mean, you know, when I was in school, we did a module on the Holocaust, and while that's great and important and historically necessary, I think far less is done about modern anti-Semitism, about how people conflate Israel with Jews, because I think that's the increase that we're seeing. I think, you know, most rational, sensible people understand the gravity of the Holocaust and they know the way it happened, but people don't get the anti-Semitism is still a very real risk. You know, there was this, you know, shootings in America, shootings in France, synagogues in Jewish supermarkets that you just don't hear talked about. You know, they pop up in the news and then they're gone. And it seems like we're not learning the lessons of these incidents.
All right, that's Josh Kaplan from the Jewish Chronicle. Thanks for joining us. And Josh, take care of yourself, won't you? Thanks for coming on. Still to come, the Sussexes are in Canada, where Harry's going to give a speech about the Invictus Games.
But with the world's television cameras in Vancouver, will that be it? You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Britain's Newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
Are you across this microaggression story?
I'm across microaggressions. I'm also across XL bullies.
You would not last 5 minutes.
Oh, for God's
So
sake, civil servants, give me strength.
So civil servants have been taught not to roll their eyes. Something you do very well. We both do it quite a lot, actually.
Because it's seen as an act of microaggression. This, by the way, this costs the taxpayer, this training, £160,000. What the hell is going on in our woke civil service? Who cares if someone rolls their eyes in exasperation?
What the hell is going on in our civil service, full stop, if the way that civil servants are communicating with each other is rolling their eyes and looking at their phones? I mean, is the government being run by people who are essentially acting to each other like stroppy teenagers?
But I'm all right with people, because, you see, I would be in defence of eye rolling.
So me too, I couldn't care less.
But do you know why? Because I want people to give me their genuine reaction, as long as it's not deeply offensive. But I want to know how people feel. And what they're being told here, civil servants are being taught, and of course this is an area of employment law, because people are taking cases against their bosses who roll their eyes at them. They're saying they're being encouraged to say nothing and nod their heads to promote transparency and inclusion. Don't show what you really think, just nod your head.
But I think that comes with then saying what you really think, and this is the key problem, and what these courses are trying to establish. And I looked into some of them when I was researching this, and it's not saying hide what you're feeling. It's saying, rather than huffing and puffing and rolling your eyes, if you've got a disagreement with someone, say I've got a disagreement with someone. Because otherwise, you can't have an effective workplace if people are sort of just passively, aggressively huffing at each other.
Why do these civil servants need to be taught this? Why do people need to be taught this? This is just normal discourse in a normal working day. You don't need a seminar on it.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Britain's Newsroom. Thank you for all your thoughts and comments this morning. We have had a lot on the interview that we did with Dwayne Lopez, the gospel preacher who was threatened with arrest by Met police officers.
5 of them.
Yeah, accused of being homophobic. He was in Uxbridge in West London. He was reading a passage out of the Bible yeah, 5 officers turned up in a police van. So, what have we got, Andrew? We've had people... David, good morning. It would be very interesting to know the religious persuasion of the person who made the complaint.
Look, we don't know who it was.
No.
And nor did the pastor.
Robin said the Metropolitan Police Force is going to change their name to the Metropolitan Police Fast Force.
Very good.
June, good morning. Christianity is the British first religion. What is happening? Why are our police force so against Christianity? And Stephen, arresting gospel preachers, anti-Semitism, the police out of control. What is going on?
Quite right. I agree. Now, moving on, everyone's favourite couple. Yes, it's them again, Harry and Meghan. They've made what I would regard as another shameless attempt to cash in on their royal pedigree.
They've adopted the Sussex title as a surname for their children. Now, this has emerged overnight, and it's apparently an attempt to unify their family.
What does that mean? Joining us now is our very own royal correspondent, Cameron Walker, and former BBC royal correspondent, Michael Cole. Michael, let's go to you first. Michael, what on earth do they mean, unifying their family? It's just commercialising the kids, isn't it?
More verbiage from the Camelot in California, I fear. Let's get down to brass tacks. The royal family's name was Saxe-Coburg-Gotha. That was changed by King George V to Windsor in 1917. The late Duke of Edinburgh lobbied for years to have it changed to Mountbatten Windsor because he said, I'm the only man in Britain who can't give his own name to his children. Right. Eventually, Queen relented. Now, if you looked at the passport of, shall we say, the Princess Royal, it would say Anne Mountbatten Windsor, occupation Princess of the UK. I know that because I've seen it. And if you looked at Harry's, it would say Henry Mountbatten Windsor, Prince of the United Kingdom. Now, if they want to change their name to Sussex or anything else, for about 200 quid, a decent solicitor in this country, by default, change your name. Perhaps they'd like to call themselves Harry and Meghan, please look at us. We don't know. They could do that if they wanted to. But it's nonsense to say that their surname is Sussex, because it's not. That is a royal title. And the way royal titles can be used legally is very constricted, and the way names of royal palaces can be used. That's why Pip and Andrew and Cameron, we don't see King Charles Cola or Buckingham Palace beef burgers, because the names are strictly controlled under Companies Act, under the laws which cover copyright and passing off. So that is the situation. Everything else that comes out of their PR machine reminds me of what Winston Churchill said of one of his opponents. He said he was inebriated with the exuberance of his own verbosity. And if you read these press releases, you have to think the same hand has been at work.
OK, Michael, just want to bring in royal correspondent Cameron Walker on this. Cameron, are we expecting any reaction from Buckingham Palace, or do you think they'll remain stum?
Well, I think it's a question of motives and legality, isn't it? As Michael points out, the legal surname is Mountbatten Windsor, but Buckingham Palace on their own website says that there's no precedent or legal reason as to why perhaps they can't change the name informally, which is why perhaps we see George Cambridge, Charlotte's Cambridge, Louis Cambridge written on their school bags when they started school in Battersea a few years ago. Of course, Harry and William, when they were younger, adopted the name informally. Wales, when they were both at Sandhurst and at school as well. So this has happened before, but I think it's the timing that's significant here because, of course, it's been announced that they have adopted the Sussex name for their children at the same time that they've rebranded the website, at the same time that they've used Meghan's royal crest on the website. And the allegation is that they're using it to capitalise on their royal status because it is, at the end of the day, a royal title.
Cameron Walker, Michael Colt, thank you so much. That's it from Britain's Newsroom. See you soon.
Recession, a word that is seared onto all of our retinas. But is it all as it seems, or is there more to this big, red, bad media word? We'll dig into the details.
And one judge has come under fire after he's accused of letting three convicted people of terror offences essentially walk free. We'll dig into the detail there. Lots of people asking whether he was impartial.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather update with me, Annie, from the Met Office. It'll be a cloudy and mild day for many of us. We do have some rain warnings in force as well.